I hauled coal for the better part of 11 years before I quit taking night runs for good. And there's exactly one stretch of road responsible for that. 2.5 miles of blacktop off Coldwater Fork outside Pikeville. A road I could have driven with my eyes shut by the time all this happened. Every pothole and frost heave already mapped out in my knees before my eyes even caught up to them. I've got a wife and a boy who was 7 that fall. And in 11 years of driving nights, neither one of them ever had real reason to wait up on me. I want to walk through the last 3 nights that changed that, in order, because I've turned them over in my head so many times since that I've started to lose track of which details are true and which ones I've worn smooth just from handling them too much. Saying it out loud straight through is about the only way I know to get it right again. I drove short haul for a little outfit out of Pikeville. 3 trucks, a scale house, a yard that flooded every spring whether you wanted it to or not. We hauled raw coal off the Coldwater mine down to the prep plant that ties into Route 80. Nights, because that's when the mine's shift actually brings coal up out of the ground, and because an empty road at 3 in the morning beats fighting log trucks and school buses come afternoon. I liked nights, liked having the road to myself, liked the particular kind of tired that comes from a long shift that's honest work and nothing more complicated than that. The stretch that did it is what everybody local just calls the Narrows. It starts where you cross the low bridge over Coldwater Creek and runs about 2.5 miles before the road opens back up by the old Little Zion Church, sitting empty and gray-boarded since I was a kid. In between, the tree line comes in close on both sides, closer than the state ever should have allowed when they cut that road. And there's 4 curves tight enough a loaded truck has to drop under 15 to make them clean. I'd run that stretch probably 4,000 times before the week I'm about to tell you about. Never thought about it twice. Never had a reason to. The first night I came off the mine a little after 3 in the morning with a full load, same as always. And somewhere around the second curve, the one we call the horseshoe, on account of the shape, I caught movement off past the tree line on the passenger side. My first thought was deer, because 95 times out of 100 that's exactly what it is, and I've hit 2 in my life and swerved around a couple hundred more. I didn't even really look. Kept my eyes on the road like you're supposed to and let it go, except it didn't go. I caught it again a quarter mile on, same distance back in the trees, moving at that easy lope a deer runs alongside a fence line when it hasn't decided yet whether to bolt. Except deer don't hold that pace next to something as big and loud as a loaded coal truck for more than a few seconds before instinct takes over, and they either cut across in front of you or peel off into the woods. This didn't do either. Without really deciding to, I eased off the pedal some, maybe 5 miles an hour, telling myself I was slowing for the grade. Whatever was back in the trees slowed with me, same distance held. I pushed back up to speed a second later, and it came right back up with me too, easy as anything, like it had never had to work to match me in the first place. It held that same gap all the way to Little Zion, and then it wasn't there. I didn't catch the moment it left because I wasn't watching for it to go, only for it to do something else. I got home a little before 6, told my wife it had been a long night, and went to bed telling myself the truth, as I understood it then, that I'd been up 19 hours, and eyes do funny things at the tail end of a shift like that. I believed it enough to sleep. The second night, same time, same load, and I want to be straight that I was watching for it now, which changes a thing like this. You see what you're looking for sometimes. I know that better than most. But I also know what I found, and it's the part that took the tired eyes excuse away from me for good. Coming up on the horseshoe, there's a sapling right at the edge of the ditch line, maybe 8 feet off the shoulder, thin as a fence post. The first night I'd half noticed it bent out toward the road, bark scraped pale on the upper side, like something had shouldered through it hard on its way toward the truck. Hadn't thought a thing of it. Deer do that. Bear do it worse. But the second night, same sapling, I know it was the same one, because there's a rusted culvert marker right beside it I've used as a sightline for years. It was bent the other way, away from the road. Same fresh pale scrape, same recent break, just aimed the opposite direction from 24 hours before. Wind doesn't switch directions like that twice running, and nothing walks through the same 8-foot gap in a fence line 2 nights straight, going opposite ways, unless it's got some reason to keep using that exact gap. I rolled my window down after that, which I don't usually do at that hour, on account of the cold cutting straight through a cab that's been running heat all night. I wanted to hear it. What came through wasn't footsteps exactly, more like brush giving way, low limbs getting pushed and springing back, the sound a body makes moving through undergrowth at a good clip. Here's the detail I still can't get past, the one I've replayed more than any other. That sound didn't trail my engine. It didn't lag behind my Jake brake the half second you'd expect if something out there were just reacting to noise. It landed right with it. A couple of times, if I'm not rounding things off to make a better story of it. The brush broke just before. My foot was still moving toward the pedal, and already something was crashing through the tree line on the other side of the ditch. Same instant, same 3 curves, both nights running. I told myself I was imagining the timing. This time, I didn't manage to fully believe it. I got back to the yard a little after 5 that morning, and Earl was in the scale house doing paperwork, the way he does most mornings before the day crew shows. Earl's run coal 30-some years, 3 different outfits before this one, and if there's a man alive less prone to getting spooked by a shadow, I haven't met him. I told him what I'd been seeing, half joking about it the way you do when you want somebody to laugh it off for you, so you can quit thinking about it yourself. Earl didn't laugh. He set his coffee down and asked me, specific as anything, "Which bend? Right past the low bridge, where it kind of hooks around?" I hadn't told him which curve, hadn't mentioned the horseshoe at all. He told me then I wasn't the first driver to bring that stretch up to him. Told me about a fella named Dallas Prater, ran for the outfit before this one, who quit hauling altogether about 9 years back. Not just that route, trucking altogether. Walked into an office one morning and put in his notice, and when people asked why, he'd go quiet and find somewhere else to be. Far as Earl knew, Dallas was still around, working parts counter at the O'Reillys in town. Hadn't driven anything bigger than his own pickup since. The one time somebody pushed him on it, years back, over a few beers, Dallas told him the only thing that mattered was it never got closer than the tree line, and he meant to keep it that way permanent, by never giving it another chance. Earl didn't tell me not to run it a third night. What he told me was, "Whatever you do, don't stop that truck in there. Long as you're moving, you're fine." Every story I ever heard out of that stretch, that much holds true across all of them. Then he told me to keep my radio on Channel 19, and to call in at the low bridge and again at Little Zion, both nights I had left on the schedule, so somebody'd know quick if I went quiet past when I should have. I'll be honest about something. I almost didn't go back a third night. Sat in my own driveway that evening with the key in my hand longer than I'd care to admit. My boy's bedroom light on behind me in the house. My wife already asleep for her early shift. What got me moving in the end wasn't courage. It was that I had a load scheduled, 3 trucks and not enough drivers to cover them, and quitting a shift over something I couldn't even describe felt like a harder conversation to have with my boss than just gritting through one more run. The third night, I checked in with Earl right before I turned onto Coldwater. Told him I was starting the Narrows. He said he'd be listening. That alone made the cab feel less empty than it had the 2 nights before. It was different from the first mile. Both nights before, whatever was out there hadn't shown itself till the horseshoe, a good 3/4 of a mile into the Narrows. That third night, I caught movement past the tree line before I'd even fully cleared the low bridge. Meaning either it had started earlier this time, or it had been there the whole first mile on both other nights, and I just hadn't caught it soon enough. Neither one sat right with me. Somewhere past the sapling, I heard brush breaking on the driver's side. My side. Every bit of it. The branch, the pacing, all of it, had run off the passenger side both nights before, consistent enough I'd started thinking of it as fixed, like the tree line itself only worked in one direction. Hearing it come off the other side meant one of 2 things, and I still don't know which one sits worse with me. Either it had crossed the road somewhere ahead of me without my catching it, or there was more than the one. I was still working through that when a deer came off the bank on my right at a dead sprint. Not the loping, unbothered walk deer do crossing on their own schedule. A full, panicked run, straight across both lanes, close enough in front of my grill that I stood on the brake out of pure reflex. Loaded truck and all, felt the whole rig lurch and groan against the weight riding behind me. I didn't hit it. Came close enough to see its eye, wide and rolling, and it never once looked at me the whole time it crossed. It was looking back over its own shoulder, at the tree line on my side, the same side the sound had just come from. The truck was down to a crawl, maybe 8 miles an hour, engine laboring to find itself again on the grade. And that's when I caught something in my side mirror. Not clear, Not a shape I could put a name to then or since, no matter how many times I've tried redrawing it in my head. Just a wrongness at the edge of the glass, closer to the truck than either of the first 2 nights had ever let it get. Close enough that for half a second, I'd have sworn it was walking right alongside my door, not 40 yards out in the brush. And then the mirror had nothing in it but trees again, like it had never been there at all. My hand found the CB mic before I'd decided to reach for it, wanting Earl's voice in the cab with me. When I keyed up, I caught the tail end of somebody else's transmission already going. Not Earl, some driver going by Catfish, his voice pulled tight in a way CB voices don't usually get, saying something about, "Right past the horseshoe, you seeing this too?" to somebody I never heard answer him. I don't know what outfit Catfish hauled for, or what road he thought he was talking about, and I never raised him again after, not that night or any night since. But I know what I heard. At the same exact time I was living through my own version of it. On the one channel everybody local runs. I got the truck back up to speed best I could on that grade, watching that mirror the rest of the way, and it held the tree line distance again the last mile, easy as anything, like the whole business at the horseshoe had never happened, like it had made whatever point it wanted to make, and backed off satisfied. When I hit the open stretch by Little Zion, it let go the same as the 2 nights before, except that third time, I sat there a beat too long afterward, engine idling, radio gone quiet, with the distinct feeling, not proof, just a feeling, and not one I've ever managed to argue myself out of, that it hadn't stopped so much as it had let me go on thinking it had. I finished that load and the 2 after it before sunup, and told my boss the following week I needed off nights, family reasons, which wasn't a lie so much as the truth pointed sideways. He moved me to a day route hauling for a different customer, and I never ran Coldwater Fork again. Far as I know, Earl's still running that scale house, and if anybody's hauling the Narrows on nights these days, I don't ask who, and nobody's told me. For a good while, I let myself believe that was the end of it, that whatever it was belonged to those 2.5 miles of Pike County, and I'd walked away clean just by staying off that road. I wanted that to be true bad enough that I stopped questioning it. This past March, I picked up a short-term run hauling gravel and fill dirt for a fella, a good 3 hours from anywhere I'd worked before. Flat country, nothing to do with coal, nobody I'd ever run with. A straight county road along a drainage ditch and a fence line, maybe a dozen scrub trees the whole half mile of it. Nothing you could honestly call a tree line. Middle of the afternoon, not even close to dark. Coming up on a bend by a fence corner, my foot found the Jake brake half a beat before my head told it to. 11 years of driving does that to a man. Your body remembers roads your mind's never laid eyes on. And off past that thin little fence row, in maybe 15 feet of scrub that wouldn't hide a good-sized dog, something eased off right along with me. I don't drive with my window up as much as I used to, even in the cold. I keep telling myself that's got nothing to do with any of this. It's not waiting back on Coldwater Fork for the next truck to come along. Hasn't been, maybe, since that third night by the church, when I sat there a beat too long and felt it let me go on purpose. It found the one it wanted, and these days, it doesn't much matter what county I'm hauling in, or what time of day it is, or how thin the cover along the shoulder gets. Every so often, I'll ease off the gas coming into a curve, and just past whatever scrap of tree line or fence row the land's got to offer that day, something eases off right with me. It's never gotten any closer than that. Not yet. But it's still keeping pace. I drove a truck for 34 years. Feed, lumber, sometimes hay overflow, once in a while machine parts for a shop that rebuilt tractors out of 3 broken ones. Mostly I ran the back roads of the Eastern Panhandle, the kind of roads where your GPS routes you down a lane that got washed out in '96, and nobody ever told the satellite. I want you to know that before I tell you the rest, because it matters. I was not a nervous man. 34 years, I never once called off a run for weather, for a downed tree, for a black bear standing in the road at 4 in the morning staring at me like I owed him money. I drove through all of it without thinking twice. Except one bridge. It sits on a county road that cuts between Hardy and Grant County, a 1-lane crossing over Widow's Creek, steel and plank deck, maybe 60 feet end to end, guardrails rusted down to lace on both sides. Taking it saved me 9 miles and 20 minutes over the state route, which doesn't sound like much until you're doing it twice a month, for a feed mill that wanted deliveries after dark, so they wouldn't tie up the 2-lane during the day. So, twice a month, sometimes more in the fall, I crossed that bridge at night, alone, same as 100 other little crossings I never gave a second thought. The night it happened, I was hauling a full flatbed, tied down tight, nothing unusual about the load. I came off the ridge doing maybe 15, slow because the approach narrows down to nothing, and you can't see the far end until you're already committed. Tires hit the deck, and that changes the sound of everything. The grate under a bridge rides different than blacktop, a kind of hollow drum note under the tandems. I was maybe a third of the way across when the whole rig settled. Not swayed, not bounced, settled, the way a truck does when weight gets added to it. I felt it in the seat, and I heard the springs take it, that metal groan a leaf spring makes when it's asked to hold more than it was holding a second ago. I checked my mirrors, nothing but the dark and my own taillights. I'd had a backup camera put in that spring for backing into the mill yard, a cheap little monitor bolted to the dash, and I glanced at that too. Grainy green nothing, empty flatbed, empty road behind me. I didn't stop. I want to be honest about that, because people ask me why I didn't stop right there and look, and the truth is, something in me did not want to put the truck in park on that bridge in the dark, and I couldn't have told you why at the time. I drove on across, pulled off at the first wide gravel spot past the tree line, and walked back with a flashlight. Load was exactly how I'd strapped it. Nothing on the trailer, nothing under it, nothing in the creek that I could see from the bank. I told myself it was a spring settling, or a pothole in the deck I didn't see, and I got back in and finished the run and didn't think about it again. That part's true. I really didn't think about it again. Not for months. It came up because I brought it up myself, which still bothers me. I was sitting at a truck stop counter off Route 55, and an old-timer named Cecil Puckett, who'd hauled that same corner of the state since before I had my license, was 2 stools down working on a piece of pie. We got to talking about shortcuts, the way drivers do, comparing which back roads save time and which ones aren't worth the risk to your tires. I mentioned the Widow's Creek cutoff, said it saved me 9 miles, and then, I don't even know why, it just came out. I said something about the one time I felt the trailer settle crossing it, and never could explain it. Cecil put his fork down. He didn't laugh, didn't ask me what I meant, didn't say, "What do you mean, settled?" He just went still for a second and then asked, real quiet, "After dark?" I said yeah. He nodded like that answered something he'd already known the answer to, and he told me to let it go. Not unkindly. He said it the way you tell somebody to stop picking at a scab. He paid for my coffee, which he'd never done before or since, and got up and left. And the next few times I saw him around the yard, he was friendly enough, but he never brought it up, and neither did I. It was maybe 15 years before I learned why he'd reacted that way, and I'll get to that. What Cecil's reaction did, though, was make me curious in a way I hadn't been before. Up till then, I'd had my own strange half-hour and filed it away. Now I knew at least one other man had a reaction to that specific bridge that didn't match a man hearing a stranger talk about a loose spring. So on a slow Saturday, I drove into the county courthouse and asked the woman at records if there'd ever been anything happen out at the Widow's Creek crossing, and she pointed me at the little historical room they keep upstairs above the extension office. Boxes of newspaper clippings nobody's digitized. There'd been an older crossing before the current bridge, a low-water ford with a wooden plank deck, built sometime in the 30s. In the spring of '53, according to a clipping I found and photographed with my phone, a flash flood came down that hollow fast, the kind that gives you no warning if you're not already watching the sky, and a truck carrying a woman's husband and 2 of her sons went off the ford in the dark. All 3 drowned. The woman's name was Ruth, and that's apparently where the creek got its name. Though the clipping didn't say that outright, I pieced it together later from an old-timer at the co-op who remembered his own father talking about it. I want to be clear about something. Finding that story didn't explain what I felt on the bridge. It just meant the ground I'd been driving over had a reason to carry weight, if you follow me. I didn't leave that courthouse with an answer. I left with a name for something I still couldn't name. For about a year after that, it ate at me in a low way. The kind of thing you think about at 2 in the morning and forget about by breakfast. So I decided to settle it myself. One night, empty trailer, nothing to lose, I drove out there on purpose, slow, windows down so I could hear everything, half daring the truck to do it again. Nothing happened. Crossed clean, no settle, no sound, nothing. I even stopped halfway, first time I'd ever stopped on that deck, and sat there with the engine idling for a full minute, listening to the creek running low underneath me, and it was just a creek. I got out, walked the length of the bridge with my flashlight, felt more foolish with every step, and drove home telling myself Cecil was just an old man with an old man's stories, and I'd let one strange evening turn into a habit of mind. For the next several years I crossed that bridge regular as ever, and nothing came of it. Twice a month, sometimes more, empty loads and full ones, spring and fall, and it was just a bridge. I'd tell you I forgot about it entirely, except that's not quite true. I never once crossed it without a small part of my attention on the mirrors. But nothing came of that attention, and eventually even that faded down to nothing. Years on, I was training a younger driver, a kid named Jesse Combs, who'd come up through a cousin's recommendation, sharp enough behind the wheel but green on the roots. I was showing him the shortcuts on my usual runs, the Widow's Creek cutoff among them, and I want you to understand I said nothing to him about it, not a word. It had been so long, and honestly, it had stopped feeling like something worth mentioning. We crossed it together at night, him watching me work the wheel on the narrow approach. Nothing unusual that I felt. We got maybe a half-mile past the far end before Jesse, staring straight ahead, asked me if the trailer always rode like that on that bridge. Said it felt for a second like the back end dropped like somebody'd climbed on. He wasn't spooked exactly. He said it the way you'd ask about a mechanical quirk, figuring there was a boring explanation. I told him it was an old bridge, deck settles funny. That's all I said. But I sat with that the whole rest of the drive, because Jesse didn't know Cecil, didn't know what I'd felt years before, hadn't heard a word about any of it from me. He'd felt it cold, on his own, with no reason to expect anything. Cecil Puckett died a few winters after that, heart trouble. And I went to the funeral because that's what you do for a man you drove roads with for 20 years, even if you never talked about the one thing that mattered most between you. It was his widow, at the gathering after, who filled in what I'd never known. She told me Cecil had lost a son, back before I ever met him, back in the 60s. The boy and two friends had been out at the Widow's Creek crossing at night, before the current bridge went in, and there'd been an accident in the water. Cecil had been the one to identify him. She didn't say it like she was telling me a ghost story. She said it like she was telling me why her husband never fished that creek, never let their grandkids near it, and never once in 40 years explained why. It settled something into place for me. Not an explanation of what I'd felt, nothing so tidy as that, but an understanding of why an old man's face had gone flat over a slice of pie decades before, at a stranger mentioning a feeling he never should have recognized so fast. I didn't think much more about it, truth told, for a long stretch after that. Retired eventually, sold the rig, figured that whole chapter of my life, bridge included, was behind me. Then my grandson Colton, 19 at the time, borrowed a friend's box truck to help move a family out near the county line. And I'd mentioned to him once, offhand, years before, that there was a shortcut back that way that saved time if you ever needed it. He took it. Middle of the night, coming back from the job, alone in the cab. He called me before he even got home, and I could hear it in his voice before he said a word. That particular flatness people get when they're trying to sound normal and aren't managing it. He asked me, half laughing to cover it, if I knew that bridge was haunted or something, because he'd felt the whole truck drop like weight had come down in the back, checked his mirrors, checked everything, and there was nothing there. That was the first time in over 40 years I told anybody the whole thing straight through, what I'd felt that first night, what Cecil said, what I found in the courthouse, what Jesse said without prompting. I told my own grandson, at my age, sounding like a crazy old man, because I would rather sound crazy to him than have him think he was the only one it ever happened to. I'm asked sometimes why I still won't cross that bridge after dark, even now, retired, nothing riding on it. A bypass built years back that makes the old cutoff pointless for anybody with a reason to be efficient. Last time I had business out that way, Colton's graduation matter of fact, I timed the whole drive home around being back over the county line before the sun went down, added the better part of half an hour to go around by the highway. Nobody asked me to. Nobody would have known if I'd just taken the shortcut in the dark like I used to 100 times. I don't have an answer that wraps it up neat. I felt something on that bridge one night that had no business being there, and a bitter old man who'd buried a son reacted to my saying so like I'd touched something he'd spent a lifetime not touching. And a green kid with no reason to lie to me felt the same thing cold on his own. And my own grandson called me sounding the way I must have sounded to myself that first night, 40-some years ago, though I never told a soul at the time. That's the whole of it. I never found out what it was. I'm 74 years old and I've made my peace with not knowing. But peace isn't the same as forgetting, and I still won't put my truck on that bridge after the sun goes down. Not for love or money. Some things you don't need explained to know you should leave alone. I should say up front, this isn't really my story to tell. It's Denny's. Denny Calhoun. Ridgeline on the radio because he'd run that stretch of Virginia road so long that people just started calling him after it instead of his own name. I drove team with him for 11 years, Redbird Freight, and I was in the truck for most of what happened, though not all of it. Denny's gone now. His heart gave out about 6 years back, sitting in his recliner with a ball game on, which I figure is about as decent a way to go as a man who spent 30 years behind a wheel could ask for. I'm retired myself these days. Don't see much reason left to keep sitting on this. It happened on US 23, up through Pound Gap, right where Virginia runs out and Kentucky starts. Nothing much to look at on a map, just a notch cut through the mountain, but it used to be meaner than it looks. Tight grade, blind curves stacked one after another, and a fog that rolls down out of the hollows in October, so thick your own headlights just bounce it back in your face. They straightened a lot of it out eventually, blasted a new cut through the gap, but back when this happened, we were still running the old road most nights, because the new one hadn't opened yet, or hadn't opened the whole way through. I don't rightly remember which anymore. We hauled reefer trailers mostly, chicken and produce, out of Georgia up to Columbus. Ran nights to keep the compressor out of the heat, and because Denny liked the road with nobody on it. Team driving, you trade off. One man drives while the other sleeps in the bunk, and the truck doesn't stop except for fuel and the log. That was the setup the night I'm talking about. I had the bunk, Denny had the wheel. It was October, and the fog was already sitting down in the gap when we climbed up into it, somewhere around 2 in the morning. I want to say I heard the whole thing start to finish, but that'd be a lie. I was half asleep back there, in that in-between kind of sleep you get in a moving truck, where the diesel and the road noise pull you down but never all the way under. What woke me some was Denny's voice, low, talking on the radio. Not calling out a bear or a wreck ahead, the way you do on Channel 19. Just talking, easy, like he'd caught somebody he knew. Breaker 19, you got a copy, Catfish? I copy you, Deacon, go ahead. I didn't think a thing of it. 2 truckers passing time on the grade. That's Channel 19 half the night anyway, especially somewhere lonesome like the Gap. What I remember noticing, without really noticing it, if that makes sense, was how the one fella talked. Real proper. Said advise instead of tell. Said that's affirmative instead of 10-4. Like a man who'd learned his radio manners somewhere formal and never shook them. I remember thinking, half dreaming, that he sounded like my granddad, who'd run one of those big base station rigs back before CB radio was even legal without a license. Then I went back under. We stopped for breakfast that morning at a place outside Jenkins, and Denny brought it up over his eggs, mostly making conversation. Said the fella on the radio, Deacon, he called himself, had mentioned pulling out of Witt's, a truck stop that used to sit off the Gap on the Virginia side. I knew the name. My dad used to talk about Witt's. Only thing was, Witt's had been closed going on 15 years, torn down not long after. There was a Dollar General standing where the pumps used to be. I said as much. Denny just shrugged and said probably some old boy still called it that out of habit, the way old men do, and we let it go. Wasn't anything to hold on to. Truckers say all kinds of things at 2 in the morning. Didn't think about it again until the following October. Near enough a year to the day, though I couldn't have told you that at the time. You don't keep that close account of Tuesday nights on a delivery run. Same load, same lane, same grade, same kind of fog sitting low in the Gap. And I woke up again to Denny's voice on the radio, except this time there wasn't any easy about it. He was shaking me by the boot before I'd even got my eyes open. Tug, wake up and listen to this. Breaker 19, You got a copy, Catfish? I copy you, Deacon, go ahead. Same words, not close to the same, the same. I sat up in the bunk and felt it go up the back of my neck, because I don't forget a conversation word for word as a rule. Nobody does. But I remembered this one, and it was running like a tape somebody'd rewound and set playing again. Denny had the same thought. He grabbed the mic before I could say a word and keyed up over top of them. Breaker Deacon, this is Ridgeline, how copy? Where you hauling out of tonight? There was a gap, longer than a man takes to answer a straight question. Then Deacon came back, and it wasn't really an answer at all. More like he'd kept right on talking through Denny, like Denny wasn't even on the air. Advise I'm loaded heavy tonight, Catfish. Heavier than I like on this grade, and this fog's got no bottom to it. Denny tried again, said his own name, asked Deacon straight out where he was sitting on the road, and got nothing back that answered him. Just Deacon and Catfish, going on with each other like two men in a room Denny wasn't in. That was the part that got under my skin worse than the repeating. It wasn't ignoring us. It was like we weren't loud enough to be heard, like we were the ones coming through faint. Then it changed. You could hear it change, same as you can hear a man's voice change when whatever he's been holding together comes apart. Catfish, I got no brakes. I'm empty on this grade and I'm still building speed. I've give it everything I got and there ain't nothing there. Deacon, listen to me now. You get on that horn and you keep it on, you hear? And you find me a runaway lane. There's one before the second cut, you know the one I mean. I don't see it. I don't see nothing in this fog. I'm coming up on the marker now. I'm at, and he gave a number. I won't swear to it exact after all these years, but Denny wrote it down that same night on the back of a fuel receipt, and I know it started with a 2. Deacon, you copy. Then nothing. Not staticky nothing either. Clean nothing, like somebody had reached over and thumbed the channel off. Denny keyed up maybe a dozen times in the next few minutes, and I did too, and neither one of us got so much as a crackle back. Channel 19 just sat there dead the rest of the way down the mountain, which if you've ever run that road at night, Channel 19 does not sit dead. There's always somebody on it. We pulled off at the first wide spot we found, and Denny got enough bars to call it in. Told the dispatcher, and eventually a Kentucky trooper, that he thought he'd overheard a truck go off the grade. Gave them the mile marker off that receipt. They took it serious enough to say they'd send somebody to look. We sat there a good 40 minutes before we let ourselves get back on the road, neither one of us saying much of anything. Nobody called us back that night, but Denny called the barracks himself 2 days later from a truck stop in Ohio, because it was eating at him. The trooper he got told him, polite enough, that they'd checked the marker he gave and there wasn't any wreck reported along there. And far as current mile markers went, that number didn't exist on that stretch of 23 at all. Denny didn't let it lie. Next time we ran through in daylight, he pulled the truck onto the shoulder near where he figured it had to be, and we walked it. Sure enough, off in the trees a little ways below the new grade, there was the old road, still sitting there, chained off at both ends with a state cable and a sign that said the route was closed. Overgrown some, but paved, with its own mile markers still standing, weathered and leaning but readable. We walked down about a quarter mile of it before Denny stopped dead in front of one. It was the number off the fuel receipt. I'm not going to sit here and tell you either one of us said much, standing in front of that marker. Denny just looked at it a long while, and then he looked back up the hill at the new road, the one we'd been running the whole time without ever knowing the old one was still down there underneath it, and he said, "We've been driving right over top of it and never knew." He filed a report with Redbird when we got back. On account of company policy, anything you witness on the road, you write it up. I think that's really what cracked the thing open, because it landed on Sherry's desk, and Sherry ran our dispatch board and had been with the company almost as long as Denny had been driving. She read his report and went quiet on the phone in a way that wasn't like her at all. Told him the name Deacon rang a bell, and asked for a day to go dig. What she came back with was a file, old enough it was still on paper, still smelling like the basement it had been sitting in. A Redbird driver named Aaron Deacon Whitfield, went by Deacon on the CB, same as some men go by their middle name their whole life. Had driven that same Georgia to Columbus Lane for the company the better part of 10 years before Denny ever hired on. The incident file said he'd gone off the old grade at Pound Gap in October. Fog, brakes gone on the downslope, dead at the scene. 10 years, near enough to the month, before the first time Denny ever heard his voice on the radio. Clipped inside that file was something else. Redbird used to run a base station out of the dispatch office in those days, before everything went over to satellite units. And the dispatcher on duty that particular night, a man named Pruitt, retired a long while by the time any of this came up again, had been monitoring 19 same as always, and caught the tail end of it live. He'd typed up what he heard for the incident report. Best he could get it down while it was happening, because that's what you did. Denny read me that page over the phone. I still remember where I was standing when he did it. It matched what we'd heard, near enough word for word, right down to the mile marker. The file had a name in it too, for the other voice, the driver who'd been on the radio with Deacon that night, trying to walk him down off the mountain. Wendell Combs, independent, hauled out of a little outfit that hadn't existed in years. His handle was Catfish. Pruitt's old notes had a phone number so out of date it was practically a joke, but Sherry was stubborn about it, and between her and Denny they ran him down through a fellow at a CB club over in Pikeville, who still knew half the old drivers in 3 counties. Turned out Wendell Combs had never left. Retired, in his 70s, living about 6 miles from the Gap in a house he'd probably driven past 1,000 times, without either one of them ever knowing what he'd carried out of it. Denny and I drove over together, both of us, because by then it wasn't only his to carry anymore. Wendell wasn't hard to find and wasn't hard to talk to, but he went quiet a minute when Denny said the word Deacon, and quieter still when Denny told him what we'd heard, word for word, all these years after the fact. Then Wendell got up without saying much and came back holding a fuel receipt of his own, older, softer at the folds than the one Denny still carried in his logbook. He'd written that mile marker down the same night, the same way, for the same reason. I told him to find the runaway lane before the second cut, Wendell said. That's what I said to him. Nobody printed that anywhere. I never told the paper that, never told the troopers, wasn't nothing to tell. He was already gone by the time anybody got up there. I've had that sitting in me the better part of 10 years, and you're telling me it come back over the air. He told us he still kept a CB, out in the garage, wired into an old base antenna he'd never bothered taking down. Said maybe twice, 3 times a year, always in the fall, always when the fog sat right, he'd hear something start up that sounded like the front end of that same conversation, and he'd shut it off before it got anywhere, because he didn't know what he was supposed to say back to it, 30 years too late to matter to anybody. He didn't figure it was random either. Way he saw it, it wasn't looking for just any truck running that grade. It was looking for him, still trying to finish a conversation that got cut off mid-sentence. And every so often it found somebody standing close enough to answer in his place. We ran together another 8 years after that, Denny and me. Same lane, plenty of those nights. Straight through the new cut most of the time once it finally opened all the way. Though every now and again dispatch would still route us the old way if the new road was shut down for weather or work. Never heard it again, either one of us. I used to wonder if that meant something, or if it didn't mean a thing at all. Denny retired the year his knees finally gave out worse than his patience for the road did, and I kept running a couple more years with a different partner before I hung it up myself. He died about 6 years back. Heart. Sitting in his chair. Nothing to do with any of this, or nothing anybody could prove was, anyway. Though I'll admit there were nights toward the end he'd bring it up out of nowhere, like it never fully let go of him. Even sitting still in Virginia with his boots off. I drove up through the Gap myself this past fall, first time in years, just to see it, taking my grandson along to look at the leaves the way you do when you're old and running short on reasons to go anywhere. I've still got an old CB bolted under the dash of my pickup, more habit than anything. 40 years of never getting in a vehicle without one. Fog was sitting low that evening, thick enough I had my lights on well before I needed them. And somewhere around where I know that old road still runs underneath the new one, Channel 19 gave a little pop of static, the kind that means somebody's about to key up. I didn't hear a conversation, didn't hear Deacon, didn't hear Catfish, didn't hear any mile marker at all. What I heard, for about as long as it takes to say it, was 4 words in a voice I'd know if I heard it come out of a stranger on the street 40 years from now. Keep the shiny side up, Tug. That was Denny's. Every single time he handed me the wheel. 30-some years, that's what he said. Nobody else on this earth ever said it just like that. That particular run of words, in that particular order. Not once, in 11 years of driving with the man. Then the channel went quiet again. same as it did that first October, and stayed that way the rest of the way through the gap. I know what skip is. Any man who's run a CB long enough knows a signal can bounce off the sky under the right conditions and turn up someplace it's got no business being, sometimes from hundreds of miles off. Sometimes, they say, further than that, though I've never had anybody explain that part to my satisfaction. I know fog does something to radio waves nobody's ever fully worked out. I know grief plays tricks on a tired man driving a road he's got 30 years of memory laid down on top of. I also know what I heard, and I know whose voice it was, and I know there wasn't another living soul on Channel 19 that whole stretch of road to have said it. I didn't key up. Some conversations, I've decided, you let stay finished. If you run 441 through the park often enough, some other driver will eventually ask you, casual as asking if you caught the game last night, whether you've ever seen anything up around mile marker 451. It's not really a question. It's a test. They already know what they saw, or think they saw, or heard about from somebody who saw it, and they're watching your face to see what it does before you've had time to decide what you want it to do. I flinched the first time I got asked. Flinched hard enough that the guy just nodded, like I'd confirmed something, and didn't push it. I've had a long time to think about what I'd say if it came up again, and I've decided the only honest thing to do is tell it straight through, once, in the order it happened, and let you make of it what you want. I'm not going to tell you I believe in anything. I've hauled freight 19 years. I know what bad light and a long day does to a man's eyes, and I know the difference between believing something and just not being able to explain it away. This is the second kind. I'll own the first part of this up front because it matters to everything after. I was running a reefer load out of the Newport, Tennessee area, headed for a receiver in Waynesville on the North Carolina side. With a delivery window, they'd dock me for missing. Normal way you make that run is I-40 through the gorge, except the gorge has been a wreck ever since Helene tore a piece of it into the river, and even patched back together it's down to one lane each way for 9 miles, 35-mile-an-hour limit, a concrete curb splitting the two directions close enough to reach out and touch. Any given evening you can sit in there 2 hours without moving 50 feet. I was already behind, and the map app showed 40 backed up past Harmon Den, and I made the call a fair number of guys make and don't talk about after. Commercial vehicles aren't allowed on 441 through the park, haven't been for years, up to a $5,000 citation if they catch you, checkpoints on both ends when they're staffed. I hadn't seen a Ranger vehicle on the last couple runs I'd made through that area for other reasons, and I decided I'd rather risk the fine than sit dead still burning my clock. Nobody made that decision but me. I want that said plainly before anything else. I knew inside 4 miles I'd made a mistake, and not the kind I was worried about. The road's not built for a rig my size, no shoulder to speak of, grades that don't let up, curves so tight you're walking the trailer around in stages, easing it into the oncoming lane on a blind bend and hoping. It was pushing 7:15, light going long and orange the way it does early fall up there. The valley already dark below the ridgeline, even with color still in the sky up top. I came around a curve past some overlook sign I don't remember the name of, and there was something in the road. Dark, low shape, maybe 15 yards out, and my only thought, there wasn't time for a second one, was bear. Everybody who drives that road at dusk has a bear story. I got on the brakes as hard as I could without setting the trailer sideways, which on a wet grade with a loaded reefer isn't near as hard as you'd want. And I felt the hit. Not a small one. I've clipped deer before, felt that little shudder that's almost nothing. This had weight behind it, one solid piece, and it came up through the frame into the seat hard enough that I had to fight the wheel straight. I got stopped maybe 80 yards on, at a gravel pull-off barely wide enough for a car, hazards going, hands not shaking yet but getting there. I grabbed my flashlight and walked back expecting a bear down in the road, or dragging itself for the ditch. Maybe already gone if I'd caught it a glancing blow. What I found was the road. Just the road. No animal. No blood. Not even a smear where you'd expect one off a hit that hard. I walked the shoulder 30, 40 yards both directions with the light down low, the way you check for a blood trail, and there wasn't one to check. I told myself it had run off under its own power. A deer can take a hit that'd kill it and still cover 60 yards on adrenaline before going down. And I mostly believed that, walking back to the truck. That's where the first thing happened I couldn't talk myself past as easy. There was hair caught in the grill, a good coarse clump of it, and a dent pushed back into the sheet metal above the bumper. The bumper on a rig like mine already sits higher than a car's would. I stood there with the flashlight and did the thing where you hold your hand up next to a mark to measure it. Not even thinking, just some old instinct. And the point of impact came in level with my own sternum. I'm 6'1". A black bear on all fours doesn't catch you there. A bear hits low, at the bumper, because that's where a bear's body is. For something to strike that high on my grill, it would have had to already be standing when I came around that curve. I told myself maybe that's exactly what it was doing. Heard the engine, stood up on its hind legs to get a look before it decided which way to go. Bears do that. I've seen bears do that. I was still crouched at the grill turning it over when I heard something move in the trees up the slope. Passenger side. Not the sound of something running, I know that sound. The crashing, panicked, breaking branches every direction sound of a spooked animal putting ground between you and it. This was slower, heavier. A shift of weight, then nothing. Like 2 or 3 steps and a stop, like it wanted to see if I'd noticed. I stood up and put the flashlight on the tree line and got maybe 20 feet of visibility before the beam just gave out against how thick the rhododendron gets up there this time of year. No gaps to see through. I didn't see anything. I also didn't hear anything else, which somehow felt worse, because it meant whatever moved was holding still on purpose now. The way you know somebody's stopped talking behind you to listen. I got back to the cab quicker than I meant to. First thing I did with the doors shut was reach for my phone. No bars. Not one. That part didn't surprise me. That whole fold of mountain is dead for signal. Everybody who runs it knows it. I sat there a second with a lit, useless phone in my hand and understood, in a way that hadn't quite landed yet, that whatever had happened on that road, I was going to be handling the front end of it alone for a while. I decided I'd push on to Newfound Gap, where there's an actual lot and, signal or not, likely a ranger around, and report it proper once I got there. Felt better having a plan, even a small one. Before I pulled out, I did what you do. Checked the dash cam. I run a forward-facing unit for insurance, same as any owner-operator with sense. I scrubbed back to the timestamp and watched it twice on the little dash screen, because the first time through I genuinely couldn't tell what I was looking at, and figured I'd misjudged the moment. It's about 1.5 seconds of footage. My headlights only reach so far before the picture goes to grain, but there's a shape coming off the shoulder, passenger side, crossing maybe 2/3 of the lane before the frame runs out past where the lights are hitting. I've seen plenty of dashcam Animal Crossings. Guys pass that stuff around in the group chats. It's practically its own genre. This didn't move like any of it. A deer crossing covers ground low and level, all 4 legs working the same job at the same time. A bear crossing is a rolling, front-heavy shuffle. What's on my footage doesn't roll and doesn't shuffle. The legs, and I keep coming back to this, it's the one detail I can't soften down, bend in the wrong places to be a bear's hindquarters. And there's only 2 of them doing the crossing, not 4. I'm not going to tell you what I think that means, because I've turned it over 100 times since, and I still don't have a species I'm willing to put a name to. I can tell you I sat there afterward in a truck cab in the middle of a national park with the doors locked, which isn't a thing I've done in 19 years of sleeping in truck stops that'd put your skin on edge a lot more than a stand of trees should. I keyed up the CB mostly out of habit, mostly because talking to somebody, anybody, felt better than sitting there alone with that footage. Channel 19 usually has somebody on it even out in the middle of nowhere. I said I'd clip something big up on 441 near the gap and asked if anybody local knew what got up that high on a grill. I was fishing for, yeah, elk'll do that, or, sounds like a big boar. What I got instead was a couple seconds of dead air, then a voice that didn't sound surprised so much as tired, asking if I was near the loop or past it. I said past it, coming up on the gap. He came back with, yeah, don't hang around up there long, get where you're going. Didn't ask if I was hurt, didn't ask what I hit. I asked him straight out if he'd heard of anything like that happening up there before, and he just said everybody who runs that road regular has a story about that stretch, and most guys don't tell it on the radio, and signed off. Nobody else keyed up after that. I sat there with the mic still in my hand a good 10 seconds before I put the truck in gear. The road climbs hard right through there, switchback after switchback, and there's a stretch, I found out after it's called the loop, where the pavement spirals up and crosses back over itself, so for a piece of the climb, You can actually see another section of the same road you just drove, hanging out there across the hollow below you. I was on the upper part of it when something on the lower stretch, across maybe 150 yards of open air and a straight drop of hillside, caught the edge of my headlights, or maybe its own eye shine. I honestly can't separate the two in my memory anymore. It was moving up the slope, not on the road, the slope itself, through timber, at a grade steep enough that in daylight you'd call it a scramble. The kind of ground where a person needs both hands. It was moving at a walking pace, steady, not lunging tree to tree the way you'd expect on ground like that, just walking, upright, like it was on flat pavement, covering that hillside faster than I could have covered the switchback above it in the truck. I clocked it because I had the time, stopped dead on a blind curve waiting on an oncoming vehicle that never came. It never sped up. It never looked like it was trying to get away from anything, mine or otherwise. It just kept going, same pace, same direction, roughly parallel to the road, until the timber closed over it and I lost it for good. I did not stop the truck to watch. I want that on the record. I put my foot down on the next flat stretch, as much as I safely could with a loaded reefer, which on that road isn't much, and I didn't look at that side of the valley again. Newfound Gap has a real lot, paved, big enough for tour buses, right on the state line. There's a low stone wall thing there tourists lean on for pictures, half in Tennessee and half in North Carolina. A ranger truck sat at the far end with somebody working paperwork by dome light, and I'm not ashamed to say I was relieved enough that I didn't even think about the citation until I was already pulling in beside it. He came out, and to his credit, the first thing out of his mouth was asking if I was hurt, which I appreciated after the CB. I told him what happened, said I knew I wasn't supposed to have a rig this size on that road, and I'd deal with whatever came of it. He wrote some of it down, wrote down the mile marker I gave him, best I could reckon off my trip computer, then started asking things that didn't track with a standard wildlife strike, near as I've since heard guys describe how those usually go. He wanted to know which direction it had been moving, north or south, not east-west across the road like you'd expect for a straightforward crossing. He asked how tall I'd estimated at the shoulder, specifically the shoulder, like that number meant something to him separate from overall height. He asked if I'd heard anything vocal, before or after. I told him no on that one, and he nodded like it fit something, wrote it down, never explained what. I asked him straight out if this was something they saw a lot of up there. He said they log every wildlife vehicle incident on that road, all of them, helps with herd management data, the kind of non-answer you'd expect from anybody in a uniform who's decided the conversation's over. He never once mentioned the citation. Gave me a card with an incident number on it, told me to get off the mountain safe, and went back to his truck. I sat in that lot another minute after he pulled out, engine running, trying to work out why a man whose whole job up there is enforcing the no commercial vehicle rule would let a semi my size roll through his checkpoint without so much as writing it up, and not landing on an answer I liked. I did a walk around before starting down the other side, the way you're supposed to after any strike. Lights, mud flaps, the rest of it. That's when I found the marks on the side of the box. Not the front, the side, running maybe 8 feet back from the cab along the driver's side panel. 4 lines, evenly spaced, cut down through the paint into the aluminum underneath, each about 1.5 inches from the next. Not a scrape, not the long, ragged gouge you get clipping a guardrail or a low branch. 4 clean, parallel lines, same depth the whole way, like something had ridden alongside the trailer at speed and held on just long enough to leave that. I stood there with my hand flat on the cold metal doing the math on what makes marks like that. And I've hauled through deer country, elk country, moose country up in the Northeast a couple times, and I couldn't get the spacing to fit anything I know. I've still got the panel. Insurance wanted photos before repair. I keep meaning to send them and keep not doing it. I had a delivery window closing and a clock running on my hours whether I liked it or not, so there was no version of that night where I sat at Newfound Gap till sunrise feeling better about things. I got back on the road down the North Carolina side, riding the Jake most of the way, curve after curve with no real straightaway to recover on between them. Somewhere in there, an honest, ordinary deer stepped out of the tree line maybe 40 yards ahead. The kind of thing that happens on that road 100 times a night come October. And I about put the truck in the ditch reacting to it. My hands were doing things I hadn't told them to do. Heart going hard enough I felt it in my back teeth. It was a deer. I sat with that the rest of the way down. The fact that my body couldn't tell the difference anymore between an ordinary Tuesday night deer and whatever it was I'd spent the last hour convincing myself I hadn't really seen. That scared me almost as much as anything else that night. Not the road, not the woods, just understanding I'd stopped being a reliable witness to my own eyes. There's one more hairpin, maybe 4 miles up from where the road finally starts to flatten towards Smokemont. Tight enough you're basically stopped to walk a rig around it, easing the trailer wide into the empty oncoming lane a foot at a time. I was halfway through that turn, trailer swung out, headlights raking the far shoulder the way they do mid-turn, when the light caught it standing right at the edge of the pavement. I had it 2 seconds, maybe 3. I've relived those seconds enough times I don't fully trust my own count anymore, but I know it wasn't longer, because the turn doesn't give you longer. It was tall, taller than my cab height at that point in the turn, which puts it well past anything I want to write down as a number and have you hold me to. It wasn't reared up like a bear getting a look at something, and it wasn't the loose, shaggy stillness of an elk caught in headlights either. The weight sat on it wrong for both, settled low and even, like it had been standing there a while before my lights ever found it. Not surprised, not bracing to bolt. The eyeshine came back flat and pale, higher off the ground than I've ever had eyeshine come back at me off anything. High enough I'd have had to tilt my head up to it standing next to it on level ground. It didn't run. That's the part I keep landing on when I try to explain why it scared me worse than something charging the truck would have. It took what looked like one unhurried step back, then another, and by the third step the tree line had it, easy, the way a man backs out of a doorway he's decided he doesn't need to walk through after all. I got the trailer straightened out of that curve on nerve more than skill, and I didn't check my mirrors again until I saw the lights of Smokemont Campground down below. I made my delivery 4 hours late. Receiver docked me like they said they would. I filed the claim as an unidentified large animal strike. That's an actual category on the form, and got a check that didn't come close to a new door panel, and let it sit about 2 months, telling myself what everybody tells themselves, that a bad night on a bad road doesn't have to mean anything past itself. What got me digging into it proper was wanting to give that trucker's warning some kind of shape, a real location, not just a curve I could point at on a map from memory. I went looking for mile marker 451 the honest way, pulled the National Park Service's own marker key for Newfound Gap Road, the one visitors use to find the overlooks and trailheads. That road runs 31 miles end to end, Gatlinburg to Cherokee. The markers go 0 to about 33. There is no 451, never has been. I checked twice, thinking I'd misheard what that first driver said on the radio, and both times, 3 separate drivers I've since asked, unprompted, no coaching from me on what number to expect, all come back with the same 3 digits for the same stretch of road. Closest I ever got to an explanation was an old boy who's run that corridor over 20 years, telling me the number belongs to a milepost on an entirely different road, a parkway system that starts hundreds of miles north and just happens to end near enough to Cherokee that somebody, a long time back, must have borrowed it off a sign that had nothing to do with 441 at all, and it stuck, the way a nickname outlives the reason for it. Nobody could tell me who used it first. It's just what you call it now, if you're going to call it anything. I think about that more than I think about what was on the road, some nights. That a place can come completely unglued from any actual map and just keep existing anyway, held up by nothing but a few hundred drivers independently agreeing to mean the same curve by it. I still run that corridor when the gorge backs up bad enough to make the math work, though I don't take anything bigger than a straight truck through there now, and I don't do it past 4 in the afternoon, regardless of what it costs me. I keep a full tank on that side of the mountain, so I've got no reason to so much as slow down between Sugarlands and Cherokee. Still haven't sent the insurance company those photos of the panel. 4 lines, 1.5 inches apart, same depth the whole way down. Last time I ran it, maybe 5 weeks back, I came through the stretch where the loop crosses itself in broad daylight. Nothing to see but ordinary green mountainside falling away on both sides. And I still found myself watching the far side of that hollow the whole way through the switchback, waiting to catch something moving on it at a walking pace that had no business covering that ground that easy. Nothing was there. There's never anything there in daylight. That's not really the point anymore. Incident report. Filed voluntarily. Not because anybody asked me to. Driver, R. Hutchins, Warren, if you want the actual name. But the paperwork's always used the initial, and I've stopped correcting it. 11 years on the road, 9 of them on my own authority, 0 preventable accidents, 0 moving violations since 2022. I'm putting that up front because everything I'm about to write sounds exactly like what a dispatcher writes off as a man who needed 8 more hours of sleep before he got behind the wheel. Maybe I did. I'm writing it down anyway because it's been 4 months and I still check my mirrors different than I used to. 0304 hours, mile marker 143, US 19, south of the New River Gorge, West Virginia. I was hauling 42,000 pounds of coiled sheet steel, flatbed, chained and bindered the way you're supposed to, headed for a stamping plant that needed the load on their dock by 6. The direct route crossed the New River Gorge Bridge, 4 lanes, high and modern, the kind of bridge that ends up on postcards. Except that week the deck had a temporary load posting on it for resurfacing work, and anything running my gross weight got kicked onto the old road that drops down into the gorge instead of across it. I'd never actually run that stretch before. I'd only heard other drivers mention it the way you mention a shortcut you've never taken yourself, second-hand, half-remembered, no real weight behind it. I want to be honest about the decision because it matters. I'd been up since 2 the previous afternoon. I had coffee, I had the windows cracked, I told myself I was fine, and by the numbers on my ELD, I was still legal. Legal isn't the same thing as rested. I knew that going in, and I went in anyway, because the load was already late once that month, and I couldn't afford a second time with that customer. Rain had been coming down since Ohio. Nothing hard, just steady. And down in the gorge it turned into ground fog thick enough that my high beams just lit up a wall of white 10 feet past the hood. No shoulder on that road, a cable guardrail on the drop side, rock cut close on the other, maybe a lane and a half of actual pavement. I checked my phone out of habit at the top of the grade. 0 bars. Hadn't had signal in almost 20 minutes. I remember thinking that was worth noting, and then not thinking about it again, which in hindsight was a mistake, because it meant that whatever happened next, I was going to be the only version of events that existed. At the top of the grade, I did what I always do before I hand a loaded trailer over to gravity, dropped into a low gear, reached over, flipped the switch for the engine brake. Felt the truck settle into that low compression growl you get when it's working, engine holding the weight back instead of the brakes. Started down. Maybe 90 seconds later the growl went away. I don't mean it faded, I mean it stopped, like somebody had reached over and clicked the switch off, except my hand hadn't moved. The RPMs weren't holding against the grade anymore, they were climbing with it. I checked the switch, still on, flipped it off and back on. Nothing. The indicator light that's supposed to come on with it wasn't lit either, which told me it wasn't just a compression problem, something upstream of it had died. A fuse, a relay, a wire finally worn through after 11 years of vibration and road salt. Didn't matter which. What mattered was, I had 42,000 pounds of steel behind me and a 2-lane mountain road with no shoulder and no engine brake to slow any of it down. You don't stop on a grade like that, not with that weight, not on wet pavement, not without a shoulder to pull onto. Your only real option, the one they drill into you at every safety meeting you've ever sat through half asleep, is to ride the service brakes down and find somewhere at the bottom, or some kind of ramp along the way, built for exactly this. So that's what I did. I got on the brakes and I stayed on them, and I started doing math I hadn't done since I was a green driver. How many miles of grade, how many pounds, how much brake I actually had. Not as much as I needed. I knew it inside of 3 minutes before I even smelled it. Service brakes on a rig aren't built to be your primary system on a hill like that. They're a backup, meant for stopping at lights, not for holding 40 tons against gravity for 4 continuous miles. Ride them too hard and they heat up, and once brake linings get hot enough they start to glaze, and once they glaze, you can stand on that pedal with everything you've got and get back less and less for it. Brake fade. Every trucker knows the phrase. Feeling it happen under your own foot, in real time, on a road with a rock wall on one side and a 100-foot drop on the other, is a different thing than knowing the phrase. The pedal started going soft around mile marker 141. I could smell it before I could really admit what the smell meant. That hot, resinous, burnt smell that isn't like anything else, coming up through the floor and filling the cab. I pushed harder to get the same result I'd been getting with less pressure 5 minutes earlier. That's when I stopped thinking about being tired and started thinking about staying alive. It was somewhere in there, coming around a long curve to the left, that I saw the first one. Across a gap in the trees, maybe 200 yards off through the fog, low on a wet rock face, there was a red glow. Steady, then pulsing slightly, the way a taillight pulses when a driver's riding the pedal instead of holding it flat. My first thought, before I had time to think anything else, was that it was my own trailer lights reflected. Which made no sense. Taillights point backward. I was looking forward and to the left. There was no way I should have been able to see my own lights unless the road doubled back on itself somewhere down the mountain. I told myself that's exactly what it was. Switchback roads do that. You can be 400 feet above a lower stretch of the same highway and see straight across a hollow at it. Headlights and taillights both. Like catching yourself in a shop window from the wrong angle. I'd seen it before, on other grades, in daylight, and it never bothered me in daylight. I kept my foot on the brake and I kept driving, and I didn't look at it again. I tried the CB somewhere around mile marker 139, mostly out of habit, mostly because talking into dead air felt better than not talking at all. Breaker, anybody got ears on the grade south of the gorge? Static. I keyed up again, and this time, maybe 30 seconds later, something came back. Not clean, half a sentence breaking up through the noise, a man's voice, older sounding, saying something like, "Watch it past the tipple, they don't grade that curve." And then it was gone, channel back to hiss. And no matter how many times I keyed up after that, I got nothing. I don't know if he heard me at all. I don't know if he was even talking to me. The speedometer had been climbing the whole time I was on the radio, and I hadn't caught it, because I'd been watching the fog instead of the dash. 34, 36, 38. I was in a low gear, on the brakes as hard as I could push them without locking the tandems on wet pavement, and I was still accelerating. That's the moment it stopped being a bad situation I could manage and became a genuine loss of control. And there's a specific kind of fear that comes with that realization that I don't think you can understand unless you've had 80,000 pounds under you and felt it stop caring what your foot was doing. The second time I saw it, it didn't go away when I stopped looking. It held through the curve, tracked with me, shifted position exactly the way a reflection of my own lights should. If the geometry was right, if I really was seeing myself on some lower stretch of switchback, except a reflection like that, across a real gap in real terrain, should lag half a second, a full second, because the two curves wouldn't be identical. The road wouldn't bend at exactly the same rate above and below. This didn't lag. It moved like it was mine in real time, which is either exactly what it was, or it wasn't a reflection of a road at all. I didn't have the luxury of working that out right then. I had a truck that was still speeding up. I'd been counting mile markers since the top, the way you do to keep some kind of grip on where you are when you can't see past your own hood. 143, 141, 139. Somewhere after that I looked at my phone, no signal, but the clock still worked, and the time on it didn't match what it should have if I'd been counting right. 11 minutes had passed that I couldn't account for in any way that lined up with the miles I'd covered. Either I'd missed markers I should have seen, or I'd lost time I didn't remember losing, which for a man alone at the wheel of a runaway truck is close to the worst sentence I know how to put together. That's when I remembered the old guy. Truck stop outside Mount Hope, maybe 4 months before any of this. Middle of the afternoon, nothing special about it. He asked where I was headed. I mentioned the gorge, mentioned the old road as a maybe if the bridge posting held, and he went quiet in a way I noticed even then. Said people don't run that grade after dark if they can help it. I asked why, expecting a pothole story, a deer story, something with a shape to it. He just said it's the kind of road that doesn't make the news. Said insurance handles it quiet. Said guys don't really talk about it, they just don't run it. I'd written it off as the kind of thing older drivers say about roads younger drivers haven't paid their dues on yet. It was landing different now, 4 miles into losing a truck on that exact road, in the dark, with no one able to hear me if I keyed up and screamed into the mic. I knew there was supposed to be a runaway ramp somewhere on that grade, an arrestor bed, gravel packed deep enough to bury tandems and kill momentum without a wall to hit. I'd seen the elevated chevron signs for one, once, on a completely different road, And I was praying this grade had the same thing, and praying harder that I hadn't already passed it during those 11 minutes I couldn't account for. I scanned the right shoulder as hard as the fog would let me, which wasn't hard enough, because I nearly ran past the chevrons before I registered what they were. Somewhere in that last stretch, my head started pounding behind both eyes. A specific kind of pressure I hadn't had all trip, and there was a taste in my mouth like I'd been sucking on a penny. I know now what that combination means. At the time, I only had half a thought for it. Something about the tightness in the cab air. Something my body was trying to tell me that I didn't have room to listen to. An engine brake doesn't just fail in a vacuum. If something under that hood had cracked bad enough to kill the wiring, it could just as easily be pushing exhaust somewhere it wasn't supposed to go, through the firewall, into a cab with the windows cracked but not cracked enough. Carbon monoxide doesn't announce itself. It just quietly starts rewriting what you're capable of trusting about your own eyes, while you're the only judge in the room. That thought scared me worse than the drop-off ever did, because it meant I couldn't fully believe anything I'd seen for the last 4 miles, and it meant I still had to act on all of it anyway, because the truck didn't care what was real. The chevrons came up out of the fog on my right, and in the same second, past them, one more time, low across the gap, the glow. Except this time it was wrong in a way I couldn't argue myself out of. 2 points of red, spaced wider than my trailer's width could ever throw them, sitting lower to the ground than my own lights ever could from that angle, no matter what road they were bouncing off of. I didn't have a second to sit with that. I had a wheel in my hands and a gravel bed 30 yards out. I put it in the ramp. Gravel doesn't sound like anything else. It's not a screech, it's a roar, deep and grinding, like driving straight into a wave, and it comes up through the frame into your teeth. The coil behind me groaned against the binders, chains singing under the strain, and for one very long second, I thought the load was going to walk right through the headache rack and end the argument for good. It didn't. The truck buried itself nose down into 30 yards of packed stone and stopped hard enough to throw me into the belt, and then everything, the growl, the roar, the wind, just quit at once. I sat there a long time before I could make my hands do anything else. Dawn came up gray, and eventually a state trooper doing his rounds found me still sitting in the cab. DOT pulled the truck 2 days later and found what I already halfway expected, a cracked exhaust manifold, close enough to the firewall to explain the wiring that had shorted out my engine brake, close enough to explain a slow bleed of exhaust into a cab I hadn't cracked the windows wide enough in. Textbook almost. Mechanical failure, driver fatigue, a road that shouldn't have had that much weight routed onto it in the first place. Every box got a clean answer. Every box except one. I found out about the other truck almost 2 weeks later, not from a news report, there wasn't one, but from a trooper who called to close out my file and mentioned it in passing. The way you mention something you assume the other person already knows. Another rig had gone off a lower section of that same grade the same night, a stretch that crosses close under mine at one particular hollow, close enough that on a clear night, under the wrong conditions, you could see straight across it. Driver didn't make it. No coverage, no press. Handled quiet through insurance the way these things apparently get handled on that road, which is exactly what the old man at Mount Hope had been trying to tell me without ever quite saying it outright. I did the math on my own timeline against what the trooper gave me, and it didn't line up with the first time I saw the glow. It lined up with the second, the one that tracked me, the one that shouldn't have been able to. I don't know that for certain. I want to be clear about that because everything up to this point I can back up with a mechanic's report and a trooper's file number. And this part I can't back up with anything but a clock I glanced at twice on a night I've already admitted I lost 11 minutes I can't account for. There isn't a box on any incident form for what I actually think happened out there, which is that I may have watched, in real time, across a gorge, the exact moment somebody else lost the same fight I was having, and mistook it for a reflection of myself, because that was the only explanation my exhausted, half-poisoned brain would let me hold on to. I still drive. I have to, but I don't run night grades anymore if I can help it. And if a dispatcher routes me around a weight posting onto some road I've never run before, I ask around first. Every time, somebody's heard of it. Every time, somebody gets quiet the way that old man did. Nobody ever tells you the whole thing straight out. That's not an accident. That's just how roads like that stay standing, not because nothing ever happens on them, but because everybody who knows better has already agreed, without ever saying it out loud, not to be the one who brings it up. This is the story I tell every rookie who rides with me now, because somebody told it to me first, and because I need at least one other person alive to know it happened the way I say it happened. I'd been driving for 6 days. Company put me on local runs first, short hauls, feeder routes, stuff a new driver can't kill himself on. That night I had one delivery left, a produce drop at a diner outside Hot Springs, and then I was supposed to swing back to the yard in Marshall. My dispatcher, a guy named Purnell who'd been doing this since before I was born, told me to take NC 209 instead of the highway, because the highway had a wreck backed up for 2 miles. 2909's a nothing road, he said. 5 minutes, maybe 6. You'll be back on 25 before you know you left it. I want you to remember that he said 5 minutes. Write it down. It matters later. 6:04 p.m. I turn onto 209. The fog's already sitting on the road like it's been poured there, not drifted in. Poured. The way you'd pour concrete into a form, filling every low place first. My headlights just bounce it back at me, so I drop to 20, then 15. I pass a fence post on my right, the kind that used to hold barbed wire for some pasture that isn't there anymore. Top rails snapped clean off and hanging by one splinter, swinging a little even though there's no wind I can feel. I remember it specifically because the shape of the brake looked like a hand. 6:12 p.m. I pass it again. Now the first time I figured, okay, fine. My brain's not tracking distance right in this soup. Maybe I clipped a driveway loop or the road curved back on itself somewhere I didn't notice. Trucking teaches you not to trust your gut about distance in bad weather. Your gut's the least reliable instrument in the cab, so I don't panic. I check my odometer against the trip sheet Purnell radioed me. 2.3 miles between the county line and the diner. My trip meter reads 1.1. I haven't even covered half the road yet. Fine. Fog does weird things to a rookie's sense of time. I keep driving. 6:19 p.m. I pass the fence post a third time. This is where it stopped being about my nerves and started being about the truck, because my trip meter, the mechanical one, the one that only moves when the wheels turn, it read 1.1 miles again. Not 1.1 miles further, the same 1.1. Like the last 7 minutes hadn't happened to the truck, only to me. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it's not the smart hero driver thing. I sat there with my foot on the brake in the middle of a public road with zero visibility, and I just breathed for a minute. Then I picked up the CB. Marshall Base, this is Unit 441. I got a situation on 209, come back. Static. Not dead static, static with a shape to it, like when you're almost tuned to a station. Then Purnell's voice came through, but it came through late, stacked on top of itself, like I was hearing him say the same sentence twice at slightly different speeds. 441, say again, you're coming in choppy. I said again. He said again. Say again. We did that 4 times before I gave up and just told him I was going to push through. He said, copy, you're almost there. And something about the way he said almost didn't sit right, because I hadn't told him how far I'd gone. 6:24 p.m. I try something different. Instead of driving forward past the fence post, I stop the truck about 30 yards short of where I think it is, put it in park, and walk. My theory, and it felt like a good one at the time, was that the loop was a driving thing, some kind of trick your body plays on you at low speed in fog, and that walking would break whatever rhythm was doing it. Here's where it gets to be a different kind of story than the one I thought I was in. I found tire tracks in the soft shoulder mud. My tracks, same tread pattern. I checked it against my own front right later, but running the wrong direction. Like something had driven this same stretch toward the county line, not away from it, and recently, because the mud hadn't started to fill back in. I hadn't turned around. I know I hadn't turned around. I have never once doubted my own steering that night, only the road under it. 6:31 p.m. Walking back toward my truck, I saw taillights up ahead through the fog, 2 small red smears, maybe 80 yards off, moving slow, another truck or a car working the same road I was. I ran for it. I'm not ashamed to say I ran, boots slapping wet asphalt, yelling for whoever it was to hold up, because another set of eyes on this would have meant I wasn't losing my mind alone. The taillights held steady the whole time I closed the distance, which should have meant I was catching up. Then I hit the fence post. My hand actually hit the wood, hard enough to split a knuckle, because I wasn't watching the ground, I was watching those lights. The lights were gone. Not faded, gone, the way a light goes when you're the one who flipped the switch. 6:38 p.m. I stood at that fence post, bleeding from one knuckle, and made myself actually look at it, instead of just clocking it as a landmark. There was a strand of wire wrapped around the broken rail that wasn't fence wire. It was thin, black, insulated, the kind that comes off a CB antenna mount. Somebody had tied it there. Not rusted onto the post, not old. The plastic coating was still glossy where the fog hadn't dulled it. Whoever left it hadn't left it decades ago. I started thinking about the taillights differently after that. 6:45 p.m. Back in the cab, I picked up the CB again, and this time somebody else was already on the channel, not Purnell. A voice I didn't know. Young, talking fast, saying he was on 209 near Hot Springs, saying he'd passed a broken fence post 3 times now, saying his odometer wasn't tracking right. He gave his unit number. It wasn't mine. I asked him to repeat his last transmission time, and he said 6:12. I looked at my dash clock. It said 6:45. Either he was 33 minutes behind me on the same stretch of road, or he was 33 minutes behind me on a version of the road that was running on its own clock. And I didn't like either answer, so I stopped asking questions I couldn't survive the answer to, and just told him to keep his headlights on his low beams and stay in his cab. He didn't respond again. I called for him 3 more times over the next 10 minutes. Nothing. 6:50 p.m. I made a decision that probably saved me, though I can't prove that. I can only tell you what I did and what happened after. I got out, left the truck running with the door open and the headlights on as a marker, and I walked away from the fence post, back the direction I'd originally come from, against the flow of the loop instead of with it. Every other pass I'd been moving the same direction the road wanted me to move. This time, I walked the wrong way on purpose. About 60 yards back, the fog thinned in a patch. Not lifted, just thinned. Enough that I could see a sign leaning in the brush off the shoulder. Old green highway marker. The reflective paint mostly gone. And it read a route number that doesn't exist anymore. NC 209. Used to run a different alignment through here before the state rerouted it in the 80s, after a wreck closed the old grade for good. I hadn't known that. I found it out later, at the library in Marshall, 3 days after, when I couldn't let it go and started digging. 6:56 p.m. Under that sign, half swallowed by kudzu and rust, there was a small marker, the kind a family puts up themselves, not the state, a wooden cross gone gray, and a plate on it too corroded to read except for one line, a name, and under it, lost on this road. No date I could make out. I stood there in the fog with my truck idling, and lit up 60 yards behind me, and I understood, in the stupid, simple way your body understands things your mind is still arguing about, that I was not the first rookie driver who'd found that fence post more than once. 7:02 p.m. I walked back to the truck at a dead run, climbed in, and did not think, did not plan, just put it in gear and drove away from the fence post, same direction as before, same as every other pass. Except this time I didn't slow down for the fog. I drove like the road was going to end, because I'd decided it either would or I would, and there wasn't a third option I could live with. 7:04 p.m. I came out of the fog so fast it felt like surfacing. 1 second gray, next second the diner's porch light, sitting there normal as anything, like it had been waiting the whole time and hadn't noticed I was late. I checked my dash clock. 7:04. 40 minutes since I'd turned onto 209. Here's the part that still keeps me up. The diner cook, an older woman named Ruth, who I still buy coffee from every run through there, told me I'd already stopped in once that night. Around 6:15, she said. Asked her for directions back to the highway because I said I'd gotten turned around, drank half a cup of coffee standing at the counter, and left again without paying, which wasn't like the polite young man she remembered from 3 weeks before when I'd done a produce run-through with another driver training me. I had never been in that diner before in my life. Not that night. Not 3 weeks before either. That was my second week on the job and I hadn't run this route yet. Purnell's dispatch log, when I finally worked up the nerve to ask him for it, showed my radio check-in at 6:04 when I turned onto 209, and then nothing until my next call at 7:04, exactly 40 minutes, matching my dash clock to the second, except the automatic GPS ping on the truck, the one that fires every 5 minutes whether you touch the radio or not, the one nobody can fake or skip, showed 6 pings between those 2 calls, all of them logged from the same GPS coordinate, the fence post. 6 pings, 5 minutes apart, same spot, for 30 minutes. And then nothing again until I rolled up outside the diner. I've driven 209, maybe 40 times since. Always in daylight, never once in fog. And I've never found that old green sign again, or the cross under it, even though I looked, even though I know exactly where I was standing that night. I did find, in the County Historical Archive, a short article from 1987 about a young trucker who went missing on the old alignment of 209 during a fog event, 3 weeks into his first solo job. They never found the truck. They found his logbook on the shoulder near a fence line, open to a page where the last entry, in handwriting the paper printed a photo of, just said the time, over and over, like he was trying to prove to somebody that it kept moving, even when nothing else did. I still take rookies on their first solo runs sometimes, when the company asks me to ride shotgun the first week. If the fog's bad, I tell them to take the highway, even if it costs them 40 extra minutes on the odometer. I never tell them why until they ask twice. Most of them only ask once, laugh it off, and never bring it up again. The ones who ask twice, I take out to that fence post in broad daylight and show them where it is, and I make them clock the mileage themselves, both ways, so they've got their own numbers to trust, instead of mine. I've told this one maybe half a dozen times, and every time I tell it shorter, because somewhere in the middle I start sounding like I'm bragging about something I didn't actually do. I didn't fight anybody off. I didn't have some hero moment where I figured it all out and made the smart call. Mostly what happened is I got lucky, and about 19 years of habit saved me a good 10 seconds before my brain caught up to what was going on. That part's hard to say out loud without sounding sharper than I was. So I'll just tell it straight this once and let you decide what you'd have done. This was 2 marches back, running US 58 through the Cumberland Gap stretch, the piece that cuts along the Virginia line before it drops you into Tennessee. I don't take that road unless a load forces me to. It's 2 lanes, no shoulder to speak of in most places, and it climbs and doglegs enough that company policy on some fleets won't route a 53-foot trailer through there at all. I had a live load of TVS and small kitchen appliances headed to a distribution center outside Bristol. Pickup number already logged, delivery window at 6 a.m., and the lane sheet had me on 58, because the interstate route added 90 minutes I didn't have on my clock. I remember I had about 40 minutes of drive time left before my ELD locked me out for the night, and I was doing the math on where I'd actually be able to park a rig that size when it did. It was somewhere past 11. No other headlights in either mirror for the last 20 minutes, when I came around a bend, and my high beams caught a shape on the shoulder, arm going up and down. Standard wave. Every driver knows it, the tired big sweep from the shoulder down to the hip, and my first read was exactly what yours would have been. Somebody's broke down. That's it. That's the whole thought. You see that wave enough years, and it stops being a decision. It's just a category your brain drops the scene into. What should have stuck out sooner was that I never saw hazards. Nobody breaks down on 58 at night without throwing their flashers. Not once in 19 years have I seen it different, because that road is dark enough that a car with no lights on is basically invisible until you're on top of it. I noticed the absence, filed it as odd, and kept closing the distance anyway, because odd isn't the same as wrong, and I was already slowing. The other thing, and I only understood this was strange after the fact, is that he wasn't waving like someone in a panic. It was smooth, practiced, the kind of wave you'd use if you'd flagged down trucks before and knew exactly how far out a driver needed to see it to have room to stop a rig that size. At the time, that read as reassuring, if anything. This guy knows what he's doing. This isn't his first breakdown. I didn't clock until much later that knows what he's doing and has done this before aren't the same kind of comfort. I did what I always do, which is nothing dramatic, just procedure. I rolled another 80 yards past him before I stopped, so he'd have to walk up to me instead of me pulling alongside him blind. I locked both doors from the inside before I cracked the window, maybe 3 inches, cold air and gravel dust coming in around the edges. I checked both mirrors for movement behind the trailer before I said a word to him. And before I rolled the window down at all, I texted my wife the mile marker and, stopping for a guy on shoulder, will update. Because that's a habit from a dispatcher who drilled it into a class of us new drivers years ago. If you're going to be a decent person on an empty road, At least leave a trail behind you while you do it. He came up easy, hands visible, said his name was Danny, said his car quit on him up around the last curve, wouldn't turn over, and could he use my phone or get a jump. Ordinary story, except he already had a phone in his hand when he said it, which struck me for half a second before I explained it away myself. That whole stretch dropped signal for 6-7 miles. I'd lost mine 20 minutes back. Made sense he'd be holding a dead phone. I told him that. Told him State Patrol usually rolls through there quicker than people think, and that I'd call it in for him the second I got a bar back. He didn't love that answer. Not rude about it, just pushed a little. Said he really just needed a jump. 2 minutes. Wouldn't even have to get out of my seat if I had cables. He'd hook them up himself. That's a normal ask. Truckers help each other with jumps on back roads more than you'd guess. So I told him I had a set in the side box, and asked where his car was so I'd know where to pull up. He pointed up the road, into the dark past my headlight cone, and said, "Just up there," which is the kind of answer you don't examine in the moment because your ear rounds it off to specific. I got the cables, walked back toward him, and that's when he said the hood release was busted on his car. Could I come look, help him get it open? I said, "Fine, let's go," and started walking toward wherever up there was, and he stopped me. Said, "Actually, would I mind grabbing something out of my trailer first?" He thought he'd seen a kit like his own back there when I pulled up, save us a trip. I want to be honest, that didn't even alarm me yet. Drivers borrow gear from each other's trailers more than people outside the industry would guess. But it was the second time in about 90 seconds his sentence had bent away from his car and toward mine. And somewhere under the tired and the cold, I started keeping score without deciding to. I looked past him then, actually looked, for the first time trying to find his car instead of just accepting it existed. There was nothing. No shape in the tree line, no glint of glass, no reflector catching my headlights. Just black woods running back from the shoulder. He gestured at that same stretch of nothing twice now, and both times I'd nodded along like it was information instead of a direction he'd pointed his hand in. Then he said something that actually stopped me cold, and not in the way people mean when they say that. He said, easy as anything, that it was a good haul I had. TVs and small appliances, right? Running for that DC outside Bristol. They usually pull 2 trailers a week on that lane. I never told him what I was hauling. It wasn't on a placard, wasn't visible from outside a sealed dry van. Wasn't anything a stranger flagging down a random truck at 11 at night should have had any way to know. That's the moment the whole shape of the last 5 minutes flipped over for me. He hadn't been trying to get me to his car this whole time. There was no car. Every single thing he'd said had been aimed, a little more each time, at getting me to walk to the back of my trailer and pop those doors myself. I stepped back toward my cab without answering him, and that's when I caught the movement in my mirror. Not behind me, off to the side, in the trees past the shoulder. A shape, shifting weight, and for half a second the dull orange flicker of a dome light coming on and going right back off, like someone had opened a car door an inch and thought better of it. He wasn't out here alone, and he'd never been waiting on a jump. His whole friendliness dropped a register right about then. Not into anything scary sounding. That's the part people don't expect. His voice actually got flatter, quieter, more insistent, and he took one step in, close enough that if the window had been all the way down, he could have reached it. He said something about how it'd really only take a second. Come on, man, help a guy out. And he put his hand on the mirror bracket outside my door. I didn't have a plan. I want to be clear about that because in the story I tell at truck stops, it sounds like I made a calm, cold decision, and that's not true. What happened is my hand was already back on the gear shift because some part of me had decided 3 sentences earlier that this conversation was ending, and when his hand landed on that bracket, my foot came off the brake before the rest of me had signed off on it. The truck rolled forward maybe 4 feet. He let go fast, stepped back, and I heard the mirror housing crack against something as I pulled away. Never did check what. I watched both mirrors the whole way down that grade, expecting headlights to swing out of the tree line behind me, and for about 1.5 miles a set did. No brights, just parking lights, hanging back at a distance that felt deliberate. Then at the next crossroad they peeled off east and didn't follow. I didn't slow down to see where they went. I kept my eyes forward and drove that truck like the load window didn't exist anymore, which it didn't. Not to me right then. I called it in at the first truck stop I hit with bars. A Virginia state trooper met me there inside 40 minutes, and I gave him the mile marker off the text I'd sent my wife. which turned out to be the only reason he had a specific enough spot to even log. He wasn't surprised, which was its own kind of unsettling. Told me there'd been 2 other reports on that same stretch since the fall. Both drivers hauling electronics or appliance freight, both flagged down the same way. One of them had actually gotten out and popped his trailer before he clocked it was wrong, and that driver ended up in a hospital in Kingsport with a concussion and a stolen trailer he never saw again. That should have been the end of it for me. And for a couple weeks it was. Just a story I was starting to feel embarrassed about telling, because nothing had actually happened to me. Then I got a call from a detective on a regional cargo theft task force. A guy who introduced himself fast and asked a lot of specific questions about the load. Not the truck, not the man. The load. What I was carrying, who I booked it through, when the pickup number got assigned. I answered what I could and asked him why it mattered. He didn't say much, which told me plenty on its own. What he did say, before he thanked me and hung up, was that they'd traced a pattern of these stops back to freight that had all come through the same load-matching platform, and that the platform had flagged unusual account access that same spring. Somebody outside their system pulling load details before trucks ever left the yard. He didn't say it was confirmed. He said they were looking into it. That's the last update I ever got. And as far as I know, that's the last update anybody got. I still run 58 when a lane sheet puts me on it, and I still catch myself glancing at that turnout every time I pass it, empty as it's ever been since. What sits with me isn't the man, or the second set of parking lights in my mirror, or even the trooper telling me about the other driver in Kingsport. It's that Danny, or whatever his name actually was, knew what was in my trailer before I ever stopped for him. He wasn't hoping to get lucky with a random truck. He was waiting on mine specifically, and somebody, somewhere back up the chain before I even pulled out of the yard that afternoon, had already told him I was coming. I've hauled freight for 12 years now, most of it up out of Knoxville, through the Gap, into Kentucky and back down again. You run a lane that long, you get particular. You learn which scale houses are manned and which ones sit dark past 6. You learn where the county never plows till noon. And you learn the cuts, the back roads that shave off 20 minutes and never show up right in the routing software, because they weren't built for anything bigger than a pickup truck. I had one cut like that outside Middlesboro, county blacktop, 1 lane wide, that ducks under an old rail bed the coal train stopped running before I ever had a license. 13.4 of clearance, painted on a sign that's taken enough buckshot over the years you can barely read the number anymore. I'd run it maybe a dozen times total in 12 years, only when I was light, and only when I was already behind schedule. Because if you meet somebody coming the other way in there, one of you is backing out blind, and it's usually you. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near it that night. 25E had a hillside come down that afternoon, a slide of shale across both lanes past the tunnel entrance up that way, and by the time I came back through empty, it still wasn't cleared. Dispatch sent it as a text instead of a call, which should have told me something, because when Deb calls instead of texting, it's because she wants to hear that you actually understood her. She didn't call that night. I found the message 40 minutes late, sitting at a red light with 11 hours already burned on my clock, and I took the cut without thinking twice about it. I'd run it a dozen times. What was one more? About a mile out, my phone dropped from 1 bar to nothing, which wasn't new. That whole stretch sits in a low spot between 2 ridgelines. What was new was how early it happened. I usually lose signal right at the underpass. That night I lost it a good half-mile before it, out past where the old mine road splits off. And same as with Deb's text, I noticed it and let it go. You do that 100 times a week in this job. Notice something small, file it, keep driving. I want to be honest that nothing about those last 20 minutes felt wrong to me at the time. Nothing prickled. I was tired and behind schedule and thinking about the sandwich in my cooler, and that's the whole truth of it. The road runs dead straight for about a half-mile before the underpass. No houses along it except one, set back off the shoulder, with a porch light left on a photocell dusk to dawn, the kind nobody remembers is even wired anymore. From a half-mile out on a clear night, you can see that light through the far mouth of the tunnel, like a chip of yellow sitting dead in the black. I'd used it for years without thinking about it, the way you use anything that's just always been there. That night there wasn't anything sitting in the far mouth. Just black on black, no depth to it. The kind of dark that won't tell you if it's 10 feet deep or 200. I figured the bulb had finally gone. Didn't slow me down 1 mile an hour for it. 38 into the mouth, same as always. And then my brights swept up the back curve of it, that flat concrete wall about 150 feet ahead, and standing dead center in my lane, dead center in the only 13 feet of width I had, was a person. I've turned over what I saw in that piece of a second enough times now that I don't fully trust my own memory of it. But here's what's still solid. Whoever it was stood facing me straight on, not turned sideways like somebody caught crossing, not startled, arms hanging down at their sides. And they were barefoot. I remember that specific. Bare feet on loose rail ballast, that sharp gray gravel that'll open your feet up in 4 steps. And this person stood on it like it was carpet. No coat, in November, at 11 at night, in a hole between 2 ridgelines that runs a good 10 degrees colder than the open road. The brights didn't make them flinch. That's the one that still sits with me more than anything else. You put a set of high beams straight into somebody's face from 150 feet, they react. Every single time. This one didn't so much as turn its head. I laid on the horn and stood on the brake at the same time, and there was nowhere to put the wheel, because the walls in there are close enough on both sides that 2 feet either way puts a mirror through concrete. So I did the only thing left, which was ride the brake down as far as it would go, and brace up off the seat, and wait for the front of that truck to arrive at where the shape was standing, which, at 38 miles an hour and 150 feet, isn't even 3 full seconds. Here's where it stops running in my head like a memory, and starts running like it's happening right now, because that's the only honest way I can tell it. I never see it move. Not toward me, not away, not down, not aside. 1 second there's a shape standing close enough that I can make out the gravel between its feet, and the next the truck bucks once, hard, up through the frame and into the seat. A short, heavy shove, like taking a curb stop too fast. And there's a sound with it I've thought about more than almost anything else in my life, because it isn't the sound I'm braced for. Hitting a deer sounds like hitting a deer. This doesn't sound like that. It's flatter, softer, something canvas hitting canvas. Then I'm through and out the other side into the open dark, and the porch light is sitting right back where it's always been. That same little chip of yellow, like it never went anywhere at all. I did not stop inside that tunnel. I want that understood, because people have asked me why not. And the honest answer is that stopping in a 13-foot wide hole in the ground with a rail bed 30 feet over your head isn't a decision. It's an instinct. And mine said get out first and figure it out second. I made it about a quarter mile past the far end before my hands told me they weren't holding a wheel steady anymore. And I put it on the shoulder and sat there with the flashers going and the diesel idling. And I did not look at the mirror for what felt like 2 full minutes. It wasn't that I thought something would be chasing me down the road. It was that I didn't want to see, framed up in that little rectangle of glass, whatever was lying back there in the dark behind me. Once you've looked, you've looked. I sat there a long time on purpose, not looking. When I finally did, the mirror showed me a straight, empty road and a black tunnel mouth with nothing in it. No shape, no shine of anything catching my taillights. Nothing at all. Which should have felt like relief, and instead felt like being handed half an answer with the other half missing. I got out with a flashlight because I had to know if there was a body behind me, whatever that says about me. Walked the whole front end. Bumper, grill, hood, both headlight housings, up under the axle where something could have gotten dragged. No blood, no hair, not even a fresh scuff in the bug guard, which on a truck with 200,000 miles on it already wears a decade of scuffs, so one more wouldn't have stood out anyway. Except there wasn't one. What I did find was a handprint pressed into the road film on the hood, up near the base of the windshield, off to the driver's side. 5 fingers and a palm, clean enough that it hadn't smeared. I stood over it a good while before it landed on me what was wrong about where it sat. That's 4.5 feet off the ground. A person standing in front of a moving truck doesn't leave a print at windshield height. Something down at bumper level doesn't end up with a hand by the wipers unless it went up and over the front of that truck, not under it. Or unless it was never down at ground level to begin with. I got back in and keyed up channel 19, mostly because hearing another human voice felt like the last normal thing left to do with my hands. Told whoever was out there I thought I'd hit somebody on the Fount Branch cut outside Middlesboro. Asked if anyone local knew that stretch. The pause before anyone came back ran longer than dead air usually does. And when a voice did answer, it didn't ask if I was okay or if I'd called it in. First thing out of him was, "You run that at night?" Then, before I could get a word out, Get off and use your phone for the rest of this. Don't run it on the air. And he clicked off. I keyed up twice more, trying to raise him again. Got nothing either time. Not even the hollow static of an open channel, like he'd shut his whole rig down rather than talk about it any further. I called the county non-emergency line next because whatever I'd hit or not, needed to be on some kind of record. The woman who answered took my name, my location, my unit number, all business. And when I got to the part about a person I couldn't find afterward, there wasn't a beat of surprise in her voice. She asked if I'd checked both shoulders past the far mouth. I said I had. All right, we'll get somebody out there when we can, she said, in the exact tone you'd use for a stray dog complaint. I asked her straight out if this was something that happened before out there. We get calls off that crossing every so often, she said, and moved right on to confirming my callback number. Like that sentence hadn't just landed on me sideways. I sat on that shoulder another 20 minutes pulling up my dash camera footage, because the truck's got a forward-facing unit that saves to a card and mirrors to my phone. And if I'd hit a person, I needed that more than I needed sleep. I found the clip, watched myself come around the bend, watched the porch light not be there, watched the tunnel mouth swallow my headlights, same as it had for real. Then the timestamp jumps. Not a freeze, not a corrupted file, a clean jump in the numbers in the corner, from 11:47:12 to 11:51:03. Almost 4 minutes gone between two frames sitting right next to each other. And in neither frame, before the jump or after it, is there a single thing standing in that tunnel. Not a shape, not a shadow that could pass for one. The lane is empty in every frame I have. I check my log next. The electronic one the company makes us run. Tracked automatic off the engine. Doesn't care what I think happened. Just logs speed and position and drive status off the truck itself. According to that unit, I was stationary, not driving, parked, inside that stretch of road from 11:47 to almost 11:51. 4 minutes sitting still in a tunnel I have never once stopped in, that I remember being inside of for something closer to 3 seconds. 2 separate machines, one on my dash and one wired straight into the engine, agreeing with each other completely and disagreeing completely with everything I lived through. I didn't trust myself to keep driving on adrenaline with no explanation, so I pulled into the first place I found with lights on, a gas station about 18 miles up the road, and told the kid behind the counter more than I meant to, mostly because he was the first face I'd talked to since it happened. I got maybe 2 sentences in, tunnel, Fount Branch, somebody standing in the lane before he cut me off. Wait, which one? The one by the tipple? Or you mean past Speedwell? Not surprised, not humoring me, asking me to be specific, the way you'd ask somebody which grocery store they meant. His uncle had worked a mine out that way before it closed in the 80s, and the kid had grown up hearing about a man who used to walk the rail bed home from third shift on foot, since he never owned a car, and cut through right where that county road runs under it now. One night in the winter, the kid thought maybe 60-something. He never made it home. Found along the ballast a ways off, no shoes on him. The kid said every version of the story he'd ever heard made a point of that, the no shoes, though nobody could ever tell him why it mattered so much that it stuck. Whether he'd been struck by something on the tracks or the road, whether the cold had made him take his own boots off for some reason nobody had an answer for. The story never settled that part. It settled the shoes, though. Every telling had the shoes. When I got back on the road and called it into dispatch to explain why I was running 4 hours late, Deb didn't ask if I'd been drinking or seeing things, which is what I'd braced for. She went quiet a second, then said, "You didn't take Fount Branch, did you?" Not really as a question. When I told her I had, she said there'd been a note on that routing for years, from before my time. Drivers weren't supposed to get sent down it after dark, company policy. Never made it into the actual software because nobody wanted to put in writing what the note was really about. She figured whoever trained me had passed it along. Nobody ever had. I stopped for the night 40 minutes up the road and didn't sleep so much as lie there with my eyes shut. And at first light I was back out walking around that truck again, because daylight does something to your nerve that the dark won't let you have. This time I saw what I'd missed. Not blood still, not a dent. 4 thin scratches close together, starting at the leading edge of the hood, running up and over the curve of it, ending right at the base of the driver's side mirror arm, like something had been dragged, or had dragged itself, from the front of the truck up the hood, and along the side toward the cab. Not down and under, the way a body goes when it's struck. Up and along, the way something goes when it's got a grip on a thing that's moving and is trying to climb it. I couldn't make myself keep driving without going back once, which I know isn't the smart thing to admit to, but it's the truth. Drove to the tunnel in full daylight, gray sky, no fog, walked a whole length of it on foot with my hazards going a quarter mile behind me. Nothing waiting for me. I want to say that plain. No shape standing in a lit-up tunnel at 10 in the morning, but down along the base of the wall, half sunk into the ballast where the drainage runs off, there was a boot. One, not a pair. Leather gone stiff and cracked, the same color as the gravel around it. Old enough I couldn't have told you if it had been there a year or 50. I didn't touch it. Stood over it a long minute, then got back in the truck, because whatever that boot had to do with any of it, I didn't want to be the one carrying it out. It's been 3 weeks since that night, and there are things about me that haven't gone back to normal. I check my mirrors now at every underpass on every route I run, not out of habit, out of something closer to a compulsion. 3 or 4 checks where one used to do it. I've woken up some nights with my jaw sore from clenching it in my sleep, which I never used to do. I haven't run Fount Branch since, and I've eaten 20 extra minutes rerouting around it every single time 25E has so much as a slowdown, and I expect I'll keep doing that for as long as I drive this lane. An older driver I've known for years, a man who ran this same territory a decade before I ever got my license, is the one who finally told me straight what I'd been circling around asking. He said most drivers who meet whatever that is come through it the way I did. Shaken. 4 minutes unaccounted for. A mark left somewhere on the truck, and that's the whole of it. He said there'd been one, though. A driver he knew personally, maybe 6 years back, who didn't stop after, just kept driving straight through and out the other end, and turned up 2 states over almost 9 hours late to a delivery that should have taken 4. No memory at all of the missing time, and a scratch pattern on his truck worse than mine. He wouldn't tell me what happened to that driver afterward, just that the man doesn't run trucks anymore, and doesn't like being asked about it. And that was the end of what he'd say on it no matter how I pushed. I'm telling you all this from my kitchen table, 4 days after I got home off that run, on a break I asked for and got without having to explain much beyond personal. I've gone back over the dash footage more times than I want to count. That 4-minute gap, that empty lane on both sides of it, trying to find something I missed the first 10 times through. Last night I had it pulled up again on the laptop at this same table. Just the frame before the jump. The tunnel mouth black and empty, paused. I got up for a glass of water. When I came back and sat down, I went to unpause it, and I stopped, because I was looking at my own reflection in the dark part of the screen behind the frozen video, the glass working like a mirror the way a phone screen does in a dark room, and standing behind my chair, close enough that, as told by Dana Boyd, recorded for the County Road History Project. You can go ahead and turn that on. I said I'd do this, so I'm doing it, and I'd rather get through the whole thing in one sitting if you don't mind. Just don't expect Russ to walk through that door partway in and start correcting me. He won't. He hasn't corrected anybody on this story in 11 years, on account of he hasn't told it in 11 years. And before that, he used to tell it so regular that the men at the counter at Underwood's would order it like a special. Tell the hitchhiker one, Russ. He'd tell it easy, grinning the whole way through, building up to the good part like he was setting a hook. And then one November he just quit telling it, cold, like flipping a switch. I want you to know that going in, because the part everybody wants, the girl, the rain, the house, I'll give you all of that, straight, the way he used to tell it to me before he stopped telling anybody anything. But that's not really what this is about. What this is about is what happened to him after. I watched that part. He never will tell you that part himself, so I suppose it falls to me. He picked her up in the fall of 1994, October going into November, because I remember he still had the truck in the short-haul rotation for the furniture warehouse out of Bassett, and that only ran through the end of the year. He was coming back empty off Route 43, cutting up onto the parkway the way he liked to when the weather let him, because he said the regular road traffic backed up something awful through the Roanoke construction that fall, and the parkway, empty as it usually was after dark, ran faster even with the curves. There's an overlook up past Bearwallow Gap, wide gravel pull-off, room enough for 2 trucks if they're both careful. He'd stop there sometimes just to eat his supper out of the cooler, because there wasn't another soul on that road most nights past 8. That night there was fog forecast, not rain. He remembered that specific detail because he'd had the AM station on for the weather right before he came up on her, and the man had said patchy fog above 3,000 feet, visibility down in spots, nothing about rain at all. So when he came around the bend into the overlook, and his headlights caught her standing there at the edge of the gravel, he had two thoughts nearly on top of each other. One was that a person walking that stretch of road at night, that far from anything, was either in real trouble or asking for it. The other was that she was soaked clean through, hair flat to her head, dress stuck to her shoulders, soaked the way you get from standing out in a hard rain for the better part of an hour. And there hadn't been any rain. Not where he'd come from, not on the radio, not on the windshield. Just fog, sitting low in the trees behind her. He always said that was the detail that should have told him something. And it did tell him something, eventually, just not that night. That night it only struck him as strange the way a stranger standing alone on a mountain road at 9 at night is strange all by itself, without needing anything extra added on. He pulled over. She didn't run up to the truck the way most people do when somebody finally stops for them, grateful, in a hurry, already talking before the doors open. She walked to it, unhurried, got in, pulled the door shut behind her, and sat there with her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting on a doctor. He asked her where she was headed. She gave him an address, not a town, not even a road name, but turn by turn, the way somebody gives directions when they've walked them 1,000 times and never once had to say them out loud to a stranger before. Past the second cattle gate, right after the low water bridge. There's a mailbox shaped like a little red barn, that's the one. And then she said, and this is the part he never changed, telling after telling, 20 years of tellings, and this line never moved an inch, she said. You can let me out at the mailbox. That's early enough. Early enough for what? He asked her. She didn't answer. She looked out the side window the whole drive, maybe 15, 20 minutes off the parkway down through the hollow, and she didn't say another word to him. And he told me later he didn't push it, because there's a kind of quiet a stranger puts up in your cab that you learn, in that job, not to poke at. He found the mailbox exactly where she'd said. Little red barn, faded, up on a post at the head of a gravel drive. Up past it, back off the road, there was a house with a light on in the front window. Porch light too, he remembered, a yellow bug light burning over the steps. She thanked him, quiet and polite, the way you'd thank somebody for passing the salt, and got out, and walked up that gravel drive toward the house with the light on. And he pulled back out onto the road because he had a schedule to keep, and the whole thing had already cost him 25 minutes he didn't especially have. He didn't watch her go up the steps. He didn't watch her go inside. He pulled out, checking his mirrors for the next set of headlights, and it wasn't until he was almost to Bassett that he thought about her again, and only then because he found, wedged down between the seat and the door where she'd been sitting, a grocery list. Pencil, on the back of a torn envelope. Cornmeal, Pall Malls, baby aspirin, children's cough syrup, the orange kind. He kept it in the glove box for about 6 weeks without deciding to. That's how he put it. Not that he decided to keep it, but that he kept finding it there every time he opened the box for something else, and every time he thought, I ought to run that back up to her. It nagged at him in a small way, the cough syrup part especially, because it made her real in a way the silent ride hadn't. A woman with a sick kid at home, walking a mountain road in the fog. He didn't like thinking too hard about why she'd been out there to begin with. So the second week of December, on a run that had him passing near enough, he cut up onto the parkway again and drove the same turns down through the hollow off Route 43, meaning to put that list back in the mailbox, or hand it to her himself if she came to the door. He found the mailbox first, same post, same faded red barn, tilted a little further than he remembered. But there, what wasn't there, was the house. I want to tell you this part the way he always told it, because it's the part people expect to come with some big turn to it, thunder and all. And it never did, not even that first night for him. There was a chimney standing by itself and a stand of weeds gone brown for the season. A concrete stoop with 3 steps that didn't lead up to anything anymore. Some scorched framing lying flat, grown up through with vine gone dormant for winter. No porch light. No light in any window, because there wasn't a window, because there wasn't a house. He sat there a good while with the truck idling, doing the thing anybody does, which is doubt his own memory before he'll let himself doubt anything bigger than that. Wrong hollow, wrong turn off 43. So he drove on another mile to a little country store, Underwood's, same one the fellas would later needle him at, bought a Coke he didn't want, and asked the old man behind the counter, easy as he could make it sound, whether he had the right road for the place with the barn mailbox, the burned-out one back up the way. The old man didn't even look up from his paper. Said the barn mailbox was Pruitt's old place. Said it had burned back in '83, November, he thought, though he wasn't dead certain on the month. Space heater, they figured, or bad wiring behind the paneling in the back bedroom. The county never did settle on which. One person died in it. Husband wasn't home that night. He was over at his brother's in Vinton. County still had the lot filed under the original name because nobody'd come around to do anything with it since. That's the whole of what the man told him, delivered about as flat as a man reads out a grocery total. Russ used to tell that part of the story the same flat way, no music under it, because that's how it had come to him. He said that was somehow worse than if the man had lowered his voice telling it. A man just stating a fact he'd known for 11 years and had no particular feeling left about. 11 years. He did that math out loud in the cab before he'd even pulled back onto the road. The house had been gone 11 years, and the woman he'd driven down that hollow with a month before had walked up a gravel drive toward a porch light that hadn't existed since Ronald Reagan's first term. He could have let it lie right there. Plenty of men would have. He didn't. He was raised to finish a thing once he'd started poking at it, and by January, he'd gone down to the Virginia room at the library in Roanoke, the local history room, where they keep the old Roanoke Times on microfilm, and sat there cranking through November of 1983 until he found it. A short piece, page 9 or 10, nothing above the fold. A house fire off Route 43 near Jennings Creek. One fatality. Loretta Pruitt, 26. Cause under investigation, presumed electrical. Survived by her husband Dale and 2 children, who'd been staying the night at their grandmother's. There was a photograph with it, small and grainy, a church directory photo by the look of it, high collar, hair set the way women wore it then. He sat looking at that photograph a long time, and I want to be fair to him here, because he never once told me he was certain. That's what stuck with me more than anything, honestly. If he'd come home swearing up and down it was her face, I could have told myself he was working himself up, seeing what he wanted to see. He didn't do that. He said the collar looked right. He said something about the set of her jaw looked right. And then he said he could not tell me, hand on a Bible, whether that was the woman who'd sat in his cab, and that not knowing was somehow worse than knowing either way would have been. He found out where her people still were. Small towns keep track of their own. And there was a sister, Wanda, living up near Buchanan, running a little beauty shop out of a converted carport behind her house. He drove out on a Saturday in February, told her he was working on something about the old home places up around Jennings Creek, which was a lie by omission if not outright, and she let him in, gave him coffee, and talked to him the better part of 2 hours. It's what she told him in those 2 hours that changed the whole shape of the thing for him. Loretta had wanted out of that marriage. Not wild, not desperate. Wanda was careful on that point. Said her sister wasn't the kind to make a scene. But she'd had a bag half-packed at Wanda's house for going on a year, and she'd talked, more than once, about waiting till the kids were a little older, and then going. Dale wasn't a man anybody in town would have said a bad word about. Steady, well-liked. Wanda didn't accuse him of anything outright, not to a stranger with a notebook, but she said it plain enough that Russ understood without her having to spell it. Some men don't hit you and still manage to make a house feel like a room with the door nailed shut. And then she told him the thing that undid him. The thing he said made the hair stand up on his arms in a way the burned foundation itself never had. She said Loretta used to have her drop her at the mailbox instead of driving her all the way up to the house. Every single time Wanda gave her a ride home from the shop. Wouldn't let her pull in the drive. She'd say, half joking and half not, "Let me out here, that's early enough." Like she needed the extra minute of walking to get her feet back under her before she had to go inside and be somebody's wife again. Russ never went back looking for another glimpse of her. I want to be clear about that because it's not where this story goes. What happened instead is smaller and slower, and to my mind, worse. He started taking the Parkway route on nights he didn't have any earthly reason to. Missed Thanksgiving that year, sat out at Underwood's for 2 hours on a made-up excuse about a delayed pickup. Went quiet at the supper table in a way he'd never been, him being a talker his whole life. And I'll admit to you plainly, because there's no sense telling half a story, that for about 6 weeks that winter, I thought I knew exactly what was going on, and it wasn't any ghost. I found a receipt from the lunch counter at Underwood's balled up in his coat pocket, dates written on the back in his own hand. 4 or 5 of them, no names, just dates and times like a man keeping a schedule for something he didn't want written down plain. So I waited on a Tuesday he said he had a run, and I followed him in my own car, hung back a good half-mile the way you do, and watched him turn up onto the parkway instead of toward the warehouse. Watched him pull into that same gravel overlook and cut the engine and just sit there. 2 hours near enough, in a cold rain. Not another car anywhere on that mountain, nobody coming to meet him. Just my husband, alone in a truck cab, staring off toward a tree line, doing absolutely nothing a man does when he's stepping out on his wife. I sat in my own car a quarter mile back and cried harder over what I was looking at than I believe I would have cried over an affair. Because an affair I could have understood. I didn't understand this. I still don't know that I fully do. I asked him plain, the night he finally came home late enough that I was sitting up waiting at the kitchen table with those coat pocket receipts laid out in front of me. Not one question about a woman, just, "What are you doing out there, Russ?" And that's the only time in going on 30 years of marriage my husband ever told me a story I had never once heard the shape of before, not even a piece of it. He told it low and steady, looking at the table the whole time, and when he finished, I understood the hitchhiker had never really been the story at all. She was just the thing that finally cracked open the one underneath her. In 1969, he was 19, driving a feed truck for his uncle out toward Narrows, and on a cold, wet night in early spring, coming back on Route 100 past a stretch by a bridge, he passed a woman standing out in the rain with her thumb out. He didn't stop. He was running late getting the truck back before the store closed, and he was 19 and scared of his uncle's temper over things that mattered a good deal less than a woman standing alone in the weather. And he told himself somebody else would be along, it being a through road and all. He never even slowed down enough to get a good look at her face. 9 days later, there was a small piece in the paper about a woman found along that same stretch of Route 100. Exposure, unidentified, no leads. She stayed unidentified so far as he ever knew. He checked, years later, more than once, and never found so much as a follow-up. He never told his uncle he'd passed her, never told a soul, not for 25 years, not until a woman soaked through in a fog that hadn't produced any rain, sat in his cab and asked to be let out early, and he stopped without a second's hesitation, the way he'd told himself for a quarter century he would, if he ever got another chance. And then he found out she'd been dead 11 years already when he did it. He said that was the part he couldn't carry right. Not the fog, not the fire, not even poor Loretta Pruitt's whole sad life, which was plenty on its own. It was that he'd finally done the one decent thing he'd been rehearsing in his head since he was 19 years old, and it hadn't reached anybody, because there was nobody left in that hollow for it to reach. Whatever he'd stopped for that night, it wasn't a woman who needed a ride. It was a debt he'd been carrying since Route 100, and it turns out you can't pay a debt like that late, not even 25 years late, not even if the world is decent enough to hand you a second try dressed up exactly like the first one. He kept telling the hitchhiker story after that for a good while, 3, 4 more years, at Underwood's, at his cousin's Christmases, same grin, same timing on the mailbox line. I used to wonder how he managed it. I think now that telling it as a ghost story was the only way he'd found to carry the other one around without having to say it out loud. Every time he told it, he was really telling the 1969 story, in code, to a room full of men eating peanuts who thought they were hearing a spook tale. He stopped for good 11 years ago this past November. Our granddaughter Emmy was over for the weekend, maybe 7 at the time, and she'd heard the boys at Underwood's talk about it, and came in the kitchen wanting Papa to tell the hitchhiker one. Russ opened his mouth to start it, same as he had 100 times. Got as far as, "There's an overlook up past Bear Wallow Gap," and then he just stopped, sat there with his mouth working and nothing coming out. I had to finish it for her myself, right there at the table, the first time I'd ever told any part of it out loud. He got up in the middle of it and went out to the porch and stood there a long time without his coat, and neither one of us has said a word about the hitchhiker to the other. Not once. In all the years since. He still drives up that road sometimes. Not for work, he's mostly off the long routes now, just drives it. Comes home a couple hours later than wherever he said he was going. And I don't ask. and he doesn't offer. And that's the arrangement we've settled into without either one of us ever agreeing to it out loud. I still leave the porch light on some nights, later than I need to, longer than anybody's coming home. I couldn't tell you anymore exactly who it's for. This happened last month, first week of June, on I-81, just outside Bristol, Tennessee. I've been driving 11 years, and I've never told this story to anybody who didn't immediately try to explain it to me, like I hadn't already spent 3 weeks trying to explain it to myself first. So I'm just going to lay it out the way it happened, in order, no dressing it up. You can decide what you want to do with it. I was hauling a reefer load, produce, up from Georgia, and I was down to 4 hours left on my 10 before I'd be in violation. There's a way station just south of Bristol that closes overnight. DOT does that sometimes, doesn't have the staff to run it round the clock. Gate was up, scale house dark, but the lot was open and legal to park in, and drivers do it all the time. I'd used it twice before with no trouble. Pulled in around 10:45, backed into a spot along the fence line, killed the engine, and started my log. Nobody else was on the lot. Not one truck, not one car. Just me, the fence, and a highway that had gone quiet the way it does after 11 at night on a Tuesday. I was almost asleep when I heard it the first time. 3 knocks. Even ones. Knock, 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 maybe a second apart, coming from somewhere on the driver's side of the trailer, back toward the rear axles. I sat up, waited. Nothing else. I told myself it was kids. There's always some local kid who thinks it's funny to smack a stranger's trailer and run. I climbed down, walked the whole length of the trailer with my flashlight, checked both sides, checked underneath. No footprints in the gravel dust along the fence. No car on the road. No sound of anybody running off. Nothing. I got back in the cab feeling a little stupid and told myself that was that. It wasn't that. Second round came a while later. I hadn't been watching the clock the first time, but I was watching it now, and it landed at 12:20. Same 3 knocks, same evenness, same spot. I sat there doing math in my head, and it took me a second to realize what was actually bothering me. It wasn't the sound. It was that the sound had shown up on a schedule. I decided to actually time it instead of guessing. Third round came at 1 a.m. Not 12:58, not 1:03. 1 o'clock. 40 minutes, on the nose, 3 times running. And that's the part that got under me, not the knocking itself, which honestly wasn't much louder than someone tapping a knuckle on a car door. It was that nothing alive is that regular. People drift. People pace a little slow when they're tired, and a little fast when they're nervous. Wind doesn't check a watch. 40 minutes exactly, twice in a row, meant somebody, or something, was keeping time better than I was. I've got a dash cam that also grabs audio, and somewhere around 1:30 I got the idea to point my phone at the trailer and just let it record through the next cycle, figuring I'd finally have something to show somebody. When the 4th round hit and I played it back, I heard something I hadn't caught live. A half second before each knock, there's this tiny click. Not a knock, quieter, almost mechanical, like a switch being thrown before the sound that follows it. I must have played that 4-second clip back 15 times. A fist doesn't click before it lands. Something with moving parts does. That changed what I was scared of, but it didn't make me any less scared. Around 2 o'clock, I called a buddy of mine, Curtis, who runs this same corridor and was parked up somewhere outside Knoxville. I told him where I was and what I was hearing, mostly because I needed to hear another human voice more than I needed advice. There was a pause on his end that went on a beat too long. Then he said, "Man, I stopped stopping there 2 years ago." Just like that. Like it was common knowledge I'd somehow missed. I asked him why, and he got cagey the way guys get when they think they're going to sound crazy. Then he told me a driver had died in his sleeper at that exact station, years back. Engine running, reefer running, and nobody found him until the next crew came through in the morning. Officially, the lot closed down after that because the state cut the budget for night staffing. Unofficially, Curtis said, every driver on this route knows the real reason, and the budget thing is just what they tell people who ask. That was the moment the night stopped being about strange noises and started being about a place with a body count. I wasn't driving off, though, and I want to be honest about why, because I know that's the question everybody asks. I had 4 hours on my clock, and if I left early and got flagged for a hunt hours violation, that's points against my CDL and a conversation with my safety department I did not want to have. I've got a truck payment, and a kid starting community college in the fall. So I did the dumb, practical thing that people in my position actually do, which is stay put and try to wait it out. I set my phone up on the dash facing the trailer through the mirror and told myself I'd catch the next one on video. Actual video, not just audio. 2:40 came. Nothing. 2:45. Nothing. I sat there with my thumb over the record button, watching the clock tick past the mark that had been perfect 3 times running. And for the first time all night, it didn't come. 40 minutes had meant something all night, and now it meant nothing. And somehow that was worse than the knocking. It felt less like a pattern breaking and more like something noticing it was being watched. At 3:04, off the rhythm completely, it came back, but different. One hard knock, fast, almost startled sounding, then silence. Not 3, not even. Like whatever had been doing this got interrupted mid-motion. That's when I stopped thinking about who was outside my truck and started thinking about what was wrong with it. I climbed down with my flashlight, and this time I didn't just walk the perimeter. I went to the nose of the trailer where the reefer unit lives, the diesel-powered refrigeration box mounted up front that keeps the produce cold. I popped the access panel and shined my light on the readout. There was a fault code blinking, something I didn't recognize off the top of my head, alongside an error for the defrost cycle. I'm not a reefer mechanic, but 11 years on the road teaches you enough to know a fault code means the unit's trying to do something and failing at it, over and over, on a schedule the machine sets for itself. I got my phone out to log the fault code for the shop and, out of habit more than anything, I checked the trailer's asset number stenciled by the door so I could put it in the maintenance request. Reefer 4471. I typed it in, and something nagged at me. Curtis had said a number earlier when he was talking about the driver who died. Some old unit number he remembered because his dispatcher used to warn guys off it by name. I called him back. It took him a minute of digging through old texts to find it. 2209. Not the same number, but when I ran my light along the door jamb where the asset tag was riveted on, up close, in the seam where the new decal met the old paint, I could see it. A ghost of stenciling underneath, scraped and repainted over but not gone. And what was left of it, if you squinted, could have been a 2 and part of a 0. I stood there a long time with my flashlight on that seam. Trailers get resprayed and reassigned all the time. New fleet numbers slapped over old ones is standard practice, not a conspiracy. But it meant the thing I'd been treating as a story about a place might actually be a story about a specific piece of equipment that had been quietly kept in rotation under a new coat of paint and a new number, still doing whatever it had been doing the night a man died in it, just now doing it to me, 40 miles and several years later. I pried at the corner of the newer decal with my thumbnail, more to prove myself wrong than anything, and underneath it, stamped into the metal itself where paint can't hide it, there was a decommission tag, partial, scratched at but readable enough, a date from 6 years back, and a code I recognized because every driver eventually learns it, the internal marking for remove from service, do not reassign. Someone had put that trailer out of commission once. Someone else, later, had put it back on the road anyway. That's the part that made me angry before it made me scared again. Not a ghost story. A cost-cutting decision with a stencil job on top of it. By 3:40, I had a headache starting behind my eyes, the kind that comes with a little dizziness if you turn your head too fast. And I want to be clear that at the time I told myself it was exhaustion, because I'd been up since 4 that morning and running on gas station coffee. But I was parked maybe 8 feet from a diesel-powered refrigeration unit that had just thrown a fault code on its defrost cycle, in dead still night air, with my truck's own APU running too. And if you know anything about carbon monoxide or a slow refrigerant leak, you know that headache and dizziness are the first thing it gives you, not the last. I didn't wait to find out which one I had. I shut everything down, rolled my windows, and sat in the cold with the doors locked until first light, watching the clock, not sleeping at all. Nothing knocked again after 3:04. Not once the rest of the night. Morning came, and the lot was exactly what it had been at 10:45 the night before. Empty, quiet, no other trucks, no tire tracks that weren't mine, no marks anywhere on that trailer skin that would tell you 3 separate times something had rapped against it hard enough to wake a sleeping man. I checked. I ran my hand along the whole panel where I was sure the sound had come from. Smooth. Nothing. I called it in to my safety department instead of just filing a routine maintenance ticket. Told them the fault code. Told them I wasn't comfortable finishing the run with that unit, and they had it swapped out at the next terminal. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Not quite. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from a guy in our shop named Earl, who'd actually pulled the reefer unit apart to figure out the fault. He's been fixing these things for something like 20 years, and he called me instead of just filing a report because, in his words, he thought I'd want to hear it straight instead of reading it off a work order. He said the defrost timer relay inside the unit had a contact that was failing, pitted and arcing instead of closing clean, and that on a bad enough relay like that, you get exactly what I described. A click as it tries to fire, then 3 sharp contact bounces before it either catches or gives up, all inside a sealed metal housing mounted against a metal frame that's riveted straight to the trailer wall. Sound like that travels through solid metal a lot better than it travels through air, he said. Stand outside in dead silence and it'll sound exactly like knuckles on the panel. Not machinery in the nose box, because your ear can't tell the difference once it's traveled that far through steel. And the defrost cycle on that particular unit, once you follow the manual, was programmed to attempt a re-trigger on a fixed interval until it either succeeded or through a hard fault. 40 minutes, near enough, was that interval. I asked him, because I had to, whether he'd looked at the unit's service history. He got quiet the same way Curtis had, said the relay had been flagged for replacement once before, years back, red-tagged by a tech who wrote, "Do not return to service until repaired," on the work order. Said the paperwork showed it never actually got fixed, just reset, cleared, and put back on the road, because a whole reefer unit costs more to replace than a relay costs to ignore. He didn't say the date out loud. He didn't have to. I'd already done that math myself, standing in a parking lot at 3 in the morning with a flashlight on a scraped-off number. I keep thinking about the thing that got me most that night, which wasn't the sound at all. It was how sure I was, the whole time, that something that regular had to be a person, because people are the only thing I know that keeps a promise like that. But people don't know they're being that even. It's machines that don't know how to be anything else. They'll do the same failing thing on the same failing schedule forever, or until somebody actually fixes them, instead of just resetting the fault and sending them back out under a new coat of paint. That trailer's gone now, actually scrapped this time, not just relabeled, I checked. But I still park at truck stops instead of empty lots when I can help it. And if I ever hear something with a rhythm to it that a person couldn't hold, I'm not sticking around to time a 4th round. I already know what that kind of patience means. And it isn't somebody waiting outside your truck. It's somebody who already stopped waiting a long time ago, and nobody ever came. Before I tell you what I saw, you need to understand what a company town actually was, because most people hear coal town and picture something out of a folk song. It wasn't that. Between about 1900 and the 1950s, coal operators in places like McDowell County, West Virginia, didn't just build mines, they built the whole world around them. The houses belonged to the company, the doctor belonged to the company, the store belonged to the company, and it was often the only store for miles, and it didn't take cash. It took scrip, a private currency the company printed and paid you in, redeemable only at that same store, at whatever markup the company felt like charging that week. Men worked a month, got paid in scrip, spent it at the only store that would take it, and came out the other side still owing the company money. That's not folklore. That's an accounting system, and there are still ledger books in county archives that prove it. When the mines closed, and most of them did, hard and fast, starting in the late 50s and finishing the job by the mid-80s, the companies didn't clean up. They shut the gate and left. McDowell County had over 100,000 people in 1950. It has under 18,000 now. You can drive for 20 minutes past houses with the porches still furnished and never see another headlight. I grew up 40 minutes from one of those towns. Not the one I'm about to tell you about. That one I'm calling Coleridge, because I'd rather not give you the real name. And by the end, you'll understand why I don't want people going and looking for it. My granddad worked a deep mine 2 hollows over from Coleridge until his lungs gave out in '71. He used to tell me about the store there like it was a specific kind of hell. Not because anybody beat you, but because the math never let you leave. He died when I was 9. I still remember him saying the name of the place the way you'd say a word you didn't like the taste of. I've hauled freight through that section of the state for going on 14 years. Regional runs mostly, auto parts, sometimes reefer loads of produce down to Bluefield, sometimes steel. I know the roads better than the GPS does, which is saying something because the GPS in that stretch of mountains is often just guessing. And I knew about the Coal Ridge Cutoff the way you know about a shortcut nobody uses, an old state route that used to connect two coal camps, still paved, still technically maintained, but it runs straight through what's left of the town, past the tipple, past the rows of company houses, past the store, and out the other side to rejoin the highway. It saves you almost 20 minutes over the long way around the ridge. Every driver who's local knows it exists. Almost nobody local uses it, and if you ask why, you get a shrug and a change of subject. And I always figured that was just the general embarrassment folks around here carry about the dead parts of the county. I didn't think there was a reason beyond that. I want to be honest about that going in, because it matters later. I didn't take that road because I felt anything was wrong with it. I took it because I was 40 minutes behind schedule on a Tuesday in March, and the way station on the main route closes at 8, and I wanted to clear it before then. Turning point 1. The dispatch call that put me behind schedule that day was a rerouted load. My usual run got bumped for a rush job, an auto parts pallet that had already missed one delivery window. That's a normal, boring logistics kind of problem. I only mention it because it means the timing of everything that happened next wasn't something I chose. Somebody in an office 3 states away moved a load around on a spreadsheet, and that's the reason I was on that road, at that hour, at all. I've turned that over a lot since. It was maybe 7:40 when I came down off the ridge, and the road leveled out into the camp. The houses came first, 2 facing rows of them, company built, small, the kind with a porch just wide enough for 1 chair. Most had lost their roofs. A few still had curtains in the windows, which is somehow worse than the ones that don't. No power lines running to any of them. I want to be specific about that because it's the detail that matters. Coal Ridge was cut off the grid decades ago. There's no substation feeding that camp. The county doesn't run electric out there. There's nothing out there to run it to. I knew that the way I know my own CDL number, because my granddad's stories always included that detail. How the company town became a ghost the second the company stopped paying to keep the lights on, literally and otherwise. Turning point 2. So when I came around the bend past the tipple and saw light in a window, my first thought wasn't fear. It was irritation. Somebody's got a generator going. Somebody's squatting in there, maybe kids messing around. And now I've got to think about whether I should call it in. That's the boring, rational first read. I want you to sit with how boring it was, because it didn't stay boring. The light was coming from the company store. It's the biggest building left standing in the camp, a long 2-story clapboard structure with the old sign bracket still bolted over the door, even though the sign itself is long gone. The light wasn't a flicker, wasn't candle-colored. It was steady and pale, more like an old fluorescent tube than a lantern or a fire. It filled the front windows evenly, the way light does when a building actually has power running to it. I had to stop anyway. The road crosses the old camp's 1 intersection. Company had put in a real 4-way back when the town had enough truck and rail traffic to need one. One of those small ironies of company towns, that they built infrastructure like a real town while running it like a plantation ledger. There's a stop sign still standing, rusted almost through at the base but upright. I stopped because you stop, because 14 years of habit doesn't care that the intersection serves nobody. And while I was stopped, I looked at the store, and there was somebody standing in the doorway. Turning point 3. Not walking, not looking out at the road, not shading their eyes against my headlights. None of the small human motions you'd expect from a person who just heard an engine and stepped out to see what it was. Just standing, square in the frame of the open door, backlit by that pale, even light. And I sat at that dead intersection for, I checked later, and I'll get to how, almost 90 seconds, foot on the brake, waiting for a car that wasn't coming from any direction, because some old brain part of me wanted an excuse to keep looking instead of driving on. The figure did not move. Not a shift of weight, not a turn of the head. I remember thinking, distinctly, that a person standing that still for that long was doing something a body doesn't do on its own. That stillness like that takes more effort than movement, not less. And holding it that long isn't something anyone does without meaning to. I pulled through the intersection. I did not speed up. I want to be honest about that too. I've relived it enough times to know I'm tempted to tell it like I floored it out of there, but I didn't. I drove the speed I always drive on that road, past the store, past the last of the houses, and out onto the state route on the far side, and the whole way I watched that doorway in my mirror until the bend in the road took it. Turning point 4. I got to the way station with 11 minutes to spare, and I called it into dispatch, not as an emergency, just as a, hey, somebody's squatting in an abandoned building out on the Coleridge cutoff, might be worth a welfare check. Because that's the responsible thing to do, and also because saying it out loud to another human being was the only thing that made my hands stop feeling strange on the wheel. The dispatcher, woman named Carla, who's worked that desk longer than I've had my license, got quiet for a second and then said, "Wayne, that store burned in '96. There's nothing standing there but the frame and some floor joists. Kenny hauled a load of scrap iron off that site 4 years ago. And she wasn't guessing. She grew up in Welch. She knew the site specifically because her cousin had done some of the demolition-adjacent salvage work himself. I didn't argue with her. I know what I saw, and I know what a burned frame with no roof and no windows looks like from a truck cab and headlights. And it did not look like that. But there wasn't anywhere useful to take that disagreement, so I logged off and drove my load and told myself I'd misjudged the building, maybe caught a different structure. Maybe my memory of the camp's layout was off after years of not stopping there. That's a comfortable lie, and I want to admit I reached for it on purpose. Turning point 5. 2 nights later, I was doing my pre-trip walk-around before a return haul, and I pulled my fuel log to reconcile the card reader receipts against the ELD data, which is just routine paperwork, the most boring part of the job. Hours of service and fuel purchase logs that auto-sync off the truck's electronic logging device so nobody can fudge their numbers anymore. That's the whole point of an ELD. It doesn't forget, and it doesn't lie. It's satellite time-stamped, and it's tied to the engine's own fuel consumption sensor. My log showed a stop. 7:41 p.m., the night I took the Coleridge cutoff. 11 minutes of idle time at that exact intersection, which matched close enough to my memory of it, though I'd have sworn it was less. And it showed 4.6 gallons of diesel logged as consumed during that idle window. A truck idling for 11 minutes does not burn 4.6 gallons. Not close. Idle burn on that engine is under a gallon an hour. I sat in the cab of a parked truck at a truck stop outside Bluefield doing the math 3 separate times because the number wouldn't rearrange itself into something sane, no matter how I turned it. Turning point 6. I called it in as a possible sensor fault because that's the category it technically fit into, and our shop pulled the truck 2 days later to check the fuel sensor and the ELD's diagnostic history. The tech, a guy named Delroy who's been fixing our fleet for going on a decade, found nothing wrong with the sensor. But he found something else, and he showed it to me on the shop laptop like he wasn't sure I'd believe him. The ELD's engine hour log for that 11-minute window didn't just record fuel draw. It logged the engine as off, not idling, off, ignition down, for the full 11 minutes, bracketed on both sides by the engine running normally, which meant that according to the truck's own instruments, I had stopped, killed the engine, and it had burned fuel anyway, and then started again clean, with no fault code, no gap in the odometer, nothing you could point to and call broken. Turning point 7. I want to tell you I let it go after that, filed it under things trucks do sometimes, and mostly I tried to. But about 3 weeks later I was talking to my aunt, my granddad's youngest sister, who still lives up near where he did, and I mentioned Coleridge, not the store, not the light, just the name, in the context of the cutoff being closed for some guardrail work the county was finally doing, and she went still in a way that made me stop talking. She asked me if I'd driven through it. I said I had, once, a few weeks back. She asked what time. I told her, and she got up and got a shoebox down from a closet, and in it was a wage ledger page, yellowed, torn out of something bigger, that had belonged to my granddad's own father, my great-grandfather, a man who died in that mine in 1938, before my granddad was even 10 years old, in a roof fall the company never fully accounted for in its own incident report. The ledger page was from the Coleridge Company store. It listed his name. It listed a running balance he owed the store the month he died, and it had never been marked paid, because a dead man's debt in that system didn't disappear. It transferred. Company had the right, on paper, to hold a man's family responsible for scrip debt if he died owing it. My aunt said Granddad used to say the family still owed Coleridge, half joking, the way people repeat an old grim family line long after anyone remembers exactly why it started. Turning point 8. I told her about the fuel log because at that point I needed to tell somebody who wouldn't think I was losing my mind. And she didn't laugh. And she didn't look surprised either, which unsettled me more than if she had. She told me I wasn't the only driver in the family who'd taken that cutoff and come back with something wrong in the numbers. My uncle, her older brother, who drove coal trucks out of that same county in the 80s after the deep mines were mostly done and only surface work was left, had told her once, drunk, at a funeral, about stopping at that same four-way on a night run and swearing he watched a full tank of diesel drop by a third in the time it took him to sit through a stop sign with no other traffic on the road. And he never took that road again as long as he lived, and he died 9 years ago without ever explaining it any further than that. Turning point 9. That was the part that actually scared me, more than the doorway, more than the ELD readout. The idea that this wasn't a single strange night, that it was a pattern, with my own name folded into it 2 generations deep, that the road had a habit of taking fuel and time from drivers who happened to share blood with a man who died owing that store money in 1938. I went and looked, on my own, at what public accident and missing driver records exist for that stretch of county road going back decades. The kind of thing that's technically public, but nobody compiles into a tidy list because nobody's looking for a pattern in it. I found 3 names of independent or regional drivers over about 40 years who were last confirmed on routes that would have put them near that cutoff around dusk, and were never found. All of it scattered across old newspaper microfiche and one county sheriff's report from 1988 that used the phrase, presumed to have left the area voluntarily, which is the kind of sentence a small department writes when it has nothing and needs the file closed. Turning point 10. I should have stopped there. I told myself I would. But there's a specific kind of pull that comes from almost understanding something that's touched your own family twice. And about 6 weeks after the Ledger conversation, on a run that didn't require it, I took the Coleridge cutoff again, in daylight this time, on purpose, telling myself I was just going to look at the store in the sun and prove to myself it was a burned-out frame like Carla said, and go home with that settled. In daylight it was a burned-out frame, exactly what she'd described. Collapsed roof, scorched joists, the kind of ruin that's been sitting 15 years since the fire and has grass grown up through the floorboards. I stood at that intersection in the sun for a long time, looking at a building that could not possibly have thrown the light I saw. And for about 10 minutes I actually felt relief, the specific relief of a bad dream disproving itself. Turning point 11. Then I noticed the stop sign, the one I remembered as rusted nearly through at the base, standing but barely. It was a different sign, new enough that the county's reflective coating still caught the light properly, a post that couldn't have been in the ground more than a handful of years, bolted into fresh concrete, you could still see the pour lines on. I asked around after, not Carla this time, but the county road department directly, gave them the mile marker, and they confirmed a work order. That intersection's sign had been replaced 18 months prior, after the old one was found knocked flat, cause unlisted, in a stretch of road that, per their own maintenance log, had exactly 1 other reported incident in the same 18 months. A single vehicle report, driver unnamed in the summary I could get without a formal records request, logged as a fuel-related mechanical failure. No injuries, no further action taken, filed at 7:52 p.m. Turning point 12. I never filed the records request. I told myself it was because it wasn't my business, and that's partly true. But the truer reason is that I already know what the math in that ledger book says, and I don't actually want the county to hand me a name that confirms it. What I know is this: the store doesn't run on the grid, and it doesn't need to, because whatever's keeping a light on in a building that burned to its joists in 1996 isn't drawing power from a substation 40 years dead. It's drawing off something closer to a running balance, the kind that never got marked paid. The kind my great-grandfather's family carried out of that camp in 1938, without anyone in 3 generations quite understanding it was still open. I still drive that section of the state. I don't take the cutoff anymore. Not for 20 minutes, not for an hour, not for any load on any schedule. And I've told my own son, who's 22 now and just got his own CDL, the same thing my granddad told me without ever fully explaining it. Whatever you owe up there, you don't clear it by paying more into it. You clear it by never going back through the door to check the balance. I believe that. I have to. Because the one number I can't make sense of, the one that sits with me on the long night runs when the cab is quiet and the mirrors are dark, is that the fuel log for that 11-minute stop was time-stamped, verified, satellite confirmed, and it logged fuel drawn from a tank that, when the shop weighed it against the receipts 3 weeks later, physically could not account for. Nobody logs fuel in Coleridge. The store does the accounting, and somewhere in a ledger I've never seen and hope never to, I think my name's already been entered in a column that isn't marked paid. She kept asking if I'd called him yet. I've dispatched trucks out of the London yard for going on 19 years. In that time, I've had drivers call in deer strikes, black ice on the gap, a bear that climbed into the bed of a flatbed outside Pikeville and wouldn't get out for 40 minutes. I've heard a lot of things over that radio that turned out to be nothing. This isn't one of those. I'm putting this down because Curtis in the safety office asked for a statement, and because if I don't get it in order now, chronological, the way it actually happened, I'm going to keep losing pieces of it in my head. Some of what follows I heard direct, off the radio or the phone, and I logged it the way we log every check-in, with the time and the mile marker, because that's the job. Some of it I got secondhand, after the fact, from Mickey Salyer and from Charlene, and from a trooper named Adkins. I've tried to mark whose word is whose. All of it, I believe. Del Coy is 54. He's driven for Caudle Freight 15 years, the last 8 of them on the same run. We call it the Southeast Loop, London to Gate City, Virginia and back, twice a week. Dry van freight over Pound Gap and down through the breaks. It's not a hard run by mountain standards. It's a slow one. Switchbacks, one-lane bridges, a stretch through the Breaks Canyon where you lose your radio and your cell signal, both for the better part of 40 minutes at a stretch. Del knows every mile marker on that road the way you know your own driveway. Same joke about the burnt coffee at the Jenkins Marathon every single week, going on 8 years. You could set a clock by that man. That Monday, I set my clock by him same as always. Monday, 5:52 a.m., KY 80, mile marker 4, outbound from the London yard. Dispatch, Unit 114, go ahead. Coy. Mornin'. Rollin' with the full 46. Y'all shorted me 2 pallets of paper goods. I ain't turning around for it. Dispatch. Copy, I'll note it on the manifest. Coffee any good this morning? Coy. Burnt, same as always. I'll check in at the Gap, nothing there. That's just Del. Monday, 9:14 a.m., US 23, mile marker 132, approaching Pound Gap. Coy. Unit 114 coming up on the Gap. Dispatch. Copy, 114. Coy. Hey, I picked up a rider back here, just so it's on your books. Didn't want you thinking I got 2 heartbeats in the cab and nobody told you. Dispatch. Say again, you got a rider? Coy. Yeah, girl thumbing it up by the overlook. Ain't said 2 words. I'll drop her at Norton. I want to be straight about how I took that at the time because it matters later. We had a policy against unauthorized riders, still do, but I'd worked this road long enough to know what you see on it. The mines shutting down, the pill trouble that never really left this part of the country. Kids and grown women both standing on the shoulder of 23 with a bag and their thumb out because the bus don't run out that far anymore. I told Del to get her out at the next stop and reminded him it was against policy, and he said, 10-4, like he always says 10-4, and that was that. I logged it as a verbal warning. I did not think about it again for 3 hours. Monday, 12:40 p.m., US 23, mile marker 148, Virginia side of the Gap. Dispatch. 114, you make that drop? Coy. Not yet, she's all right, don't say much. Dispatch. Del, who is she? Coy. I didn't get her name. Here's the thing that should have stopped me cold and didn't. Not yet. I pulled Del's file that afternoon out of plain curiosity, mostly to see if I needed to write him up formal. 15 years with the company, 8 years on that exact run. Not one single incident of an unauthorized passenger. Not one. This is a man who wouldn't let his own grandson ride along to the yard without calling me first to check if it violated the policy. A guy that careful doesn't pick up a stranger on a mountain road and just forget to ask her name 3 hours later. Monday, 4:30 p.m., Gate City, Virginia yard. Coy. Made the drop. Headed to the hotel. Dispatch. They get the count right? Coy. Yep. Dispatch. What about your rider? Coy. She got out here. Short. No joke about the coffee, no complaint about the dock workers, which is a subject Dell can usually go on about for a good 2 minutes. I remember thinking he sounded tired and leaving it at that. I closed the incident out in my head. I was wrong too. That evening around 8, the office line rang and it was Charlene, Dell's wife. Did you call him yet? She asked before I even got my name out. I told her he'd made his drop fine, checked in on schedule, nothing wrong that I could see. Did he sound right to you? I said he sounded tired. She was quiet a second, then said something about it being that week, and asked would I call her the second I heard from him again, not wait for her to call me. I said sure. Figured it for some kind of anniversary thing. None of my business. I didn't think hard about it. I should have. Tuesday, 6:03 a.m., US 58 near Norton, Virginia, return leg. Coy. 114, rolling. Dispatch. Copy. Sleep all right? Coy. Not really. She's back. Dispatch. Who's back, Dell? Coy. The rider. Same one. Got in right at the gap again, same spot. That's the point I actually felt something turn over in my stomach. Because Dell wasn't describing a coincidence, he was describing a routine. Same spot. I asked him what she looked like, mostly to keep him talking, and he told me, flat, like he was reading off a bill of lading. Young, dark coat. Always got it buttoned up even though it's July and near 90 degrees out. Doesn't talk. Sits with her hands folded in her lap like she's in church. I've worked that stretch of road by radio for going on 2 decades, and that description didn't scare me by itself. There's a clinic up that way, a shelter down in Norton, and truckers being truckers. Everybody's got a story about somebody they picked up or somebody they saw standing at that overlook who wasn't quite right. Fog sits in that gap thick enough some mornings you'll lose a coal truck in it 30 feet ahead of you. I told myself the mountain plays tricks on tired men. I told Dell to be careful and keep me posted, and hung up believing my own explanation for about 4 more hours. Tuesday, 11:20 a.m., off-schedule call, dispatch to Mickey Salyer, Unit 108. Mickey was running the same loop about 90 minutes behind Dell that day. I called him direct, off the log, just to ask if he'd laid eyes on Dell. Dispatch. You see 114 out there today? Salyer. Yeah, seen him stopped on the shoulder up past the gap, hazards on. Pulled up alongside to check was he broke down. Dispatch. And? Salyer. He was in there talking, arms going like he was having a whole argument with somebody. I figured he had a rider, so I let off and swung around to get a look at the passenger side before I pulled back on. Dispatch. And? Salyer. Wasn't nobody in there, man. He was by himself, just sitting there talking to the empty seat. I sat with that a while before I called Dell back. When I did, I asked him straight, was he alone in that cab? He said no, she was sitting right there, and asked why I'd want to know a thing like that. Tuesday, 3:47 p.m., London Yard, inbound. Coy. Back. Dispatch. That's it? Everything go all right? Coy. Yeah. One-word answers, from a man who 2 days before couldn't get off the radio without telling me about his coffee. I called Charlene that evening like I'd promised, told her what Mickey saw. I expected her to be surprised. She wasn't. She was quiet a long time. Then she told me about Josie. Josie was their daughter. 19 years old, 6 years back, driving home from a diner shift in Whitesburg in the rain. Went off the road at the horseshoe curve on the Virginia side of the gap. The same stretch, same 20-yard patch of shoulder Dell had been idling on when Mickey pulled up next to him. Charlene said Dell doesn't talk about her, not ever. Not on her birthday, not at Christmas, not once in 6 years that she can recall him saying that girl's name out loud. But he gets strange this time of year, every year, right around the date. Quiet. Sleeps bad. Last year she'd caught him getting dressed at 2 in the morning, saying he was going to go check on something out on 23, and she'd had to physically stand between him and the truck keys to keep him home. This year, she said, felt worse than last year, and that's why she'd been asking me the same question every time she called. Had I called him yet? She wasn't asking as a courtesy. She was asking because she was scared. I told her I'd flag his unit for extra check-ins. I meant it as a comfort. I don't think it helped either one of us sleep that night. Wednesday. Del was off. Charlene called once, said he'd stayed in bed most of the day. Quiet but himself. Ate dinner, watched TV. Nothing alarming. I let myself relax some. I shouldn't have, but I did. Thursday morning he was back on schedule. I'd flagged his unit and told the morning gate guard, an older fellow named Sherman who takes the security photo of every truck on the way out, to keep an eye out. Thursday, 5:58 a.m., KY 80, mile marker 4, outbound from the London yard. Coy, Unit 114, rolling. Dispatch, copy, 114. How you feeling this morning? Coy, fine. Dispatch, sleep good? Coy, fine. Thursday, 9:05 a.m., US 23, mile marker 132, approaching the gap. Coy, coming up on it. Dispatch, copy that, 114. You good? Coy, yeah. I want to be honest. That call didn't worry me the way it should have, because yeah and fine is still Del answering, still Del on schedule, still Del at the mile marker he's supposed to be at the time he's supposed to be there. It's what came after that broke the pattern I could still make sense of. Our trucks run electronic logging devices, GPS tied, automatic, no way around it. Around 9:40 I pulled up Del's unit on the board out of habit, just checking his progress against his call-in, and the numbers didn't match. He'd radioed at 9:05 that he was coming up on the gap, mile marker 132. The log had him stopped, engine idling, 0 speed, at mile marker 151, 19 miles further down the Virginia side than he should have been able to reach by then. Parked there, unmoving, since 8:58. 7 minutes before he ever radioed me. He'd called in a location he wasn't at anymore, like his voice was still back at the gap while his truck had already gone on ahead of him. Mile marker 151 is the horseshoe curve. It's where Josie went off the road. I tried him 6 times on the radio starting at 10:54. Nothing. I had Curtis standing next to my desk and Charlene already on hold on the other line, because I'd called her the second the numbers didn't add up. At 11:12 he came back. Dispatch. 114, you copy? Coy. Yeah, I copy. Dispatch. Del, where are you right now? Coy. She wants me to take her home now. I told her I would. Dispatch. Who? Del? Who wants you to take her home? Coy. Josie. I've replayed those 11 seconds of silence before he said her name more times than I can count. The whole room went still, Curtis included, and Charlene, still on hold, started crying before I'd even told her what he said, like she already knew from the shape of my voice what was coming. We called Virginia State Police out of the Wise office right then. I stayed on that radio the whole time trying to keep him talking, and mostly what I got back was silence. And once, close to noon, one sentence I wrote down word for word because my hands needed something to do. She said she's real tired of riding. A trooper named Adkins found the truck 40 minutes later, pulled off at the overlook above the horseshoe curve, hazards on, engine running, driver's door standing open. Del was outside the cab near the guardrail, just standing, looking down into the gorge. Adkins said Del didn't seem surprised to see him. Del said, "She got out here. She said she's home now." Then he let the trooper walk him back to the cruiser without a fight. He was checked out at the hospital in Norton that afternoon. Physically, he was fine, dehydrated, exhausted. Charlene told us later he'd quietly stopped taking a sleep prescription he'd been on since the year Josie died, ran out of it the week before, and never said a word to her, which the doctor said could account for a man going 3 or 4 nights without real sleep and starting to see things that aren't there sitting next to him in a truck cab. That's the explanation I clung to for about 2 days. It's a good explanation. It fits. Then Sherman came and found me at the end of my shift that Thursday, before any of us knew yet that Del had been found safe, while we were all still sick with waiting. Sherman runs the morning gate, takes the automatic photo every outbound truck gets when it crosses the scale. He'd gone back and pulled Thursday's, 5:58, Unit 114, the one taken the same minute Del radioed in sounding fine, sounding like himself, hours before the gap, hours before anybody's account of a rider getting in anywhere. Sherman didn't say much when he showed it to me, just turned his laptop around. It's not a good photo. Never is. Cheap security camera, dawn light, glare off the windshield. But in the passenger seat, Past Dell's shoulder, there's a shape. Pale. Turned toward the window like it's looking out at something. Sherman said his first thought was that Dell had hung his high-vis vest over the headrest like some drivers do, and I wanted that to be true so bad I made him pull up 2 other mornings that week to compare, hunting for the vest in both of them so I could tell myself that's all it ever was. It wasn't in either one, and there's a plain fact underneath all of it that no amount of wanting will move. Sherman's gate is the only way in or out of that yard, and his log shows Dell rolled through it alone, same as every morning for 8 years, with nobody walking up beside that truck before it ever left our lot. Dell's back at work now. Off the mountain routes, Charlene asked for that, and the company gave it to him without a fight. Moved him onto a local delivery route that never takes him past London city limits. He's in counseling. Charlene says he talks about Josie now, some, which he never did before. And she says that's worth more to her than she can put into words, whatever else came with it. She still calls the office sometimes. Not every week anymore, but every so often the phone rings and it's her voice, and the first thing out of her mouth is still the same question it always was. Did you call him yet? I always have. He always answers now. A few weeks after, a driver named Cutter Ratliff, who doesn't know one thing about any of this, radioed in off the southeast loop, matter of fact, asking if it was normal to see a girl standing up at the Gap overlook in a heavy coat in 90-degree heat, thumb out, not moving much. Another driver came back over the channel before I could answer, somebody who's run that road longer than I've been dispatching, and said, easy as anything, like it was just a fact about the road, same as the switchbacks or the fog. Happens up there sometimes. Don't stop for her. I didn't say anything on the radio. I wrote it in the log, same as I've written everything else here, with the time and the mile marker, because that's the job, and because I still don't know what else to do with it, except set it down and let somebody else decide what it means. She kept asking if I'd called him yet. I've dispatched trucks out of the London yard for going on 19 years. In that time, I've had drivers call in deer strikes, black ice on the Gap, a bear that climbed into the bed of a flatbed outside Pikeville and wouldn't get out for 40 minutes. I've heard a lot of things over that radio that turned out to be nothing. This isn't one of those. I'm putting this down because Curtis in the safety office asked for a statement, and because if I don't get it in order now, chronological, the way it actually happened, I'm going to keep losing pieces of it in my head. Some of what follows I heard direct, off the radio or the phone, and I logged it the way we log every check-in, with the time and the mile marker, because that's the job. Some of it I got secondhand, after the fact, from Mickey Salyer and from Charlene, and from a trooper named Adkins. I've tried to mark whose word is whose. All of it, I believe. Del Coy is 54. He's driven for Caudle Freight 15 years, the last 8 of them on the same run. We call it the Southeast Loop, London to Gate City, Virginia and back, twice a week. Dry van freight over Pound Gap and down through the breaks. It's not a hard run by mountain standards. It's a slow one. Switchbacks, 1-lane bridges, a stretch through the Breaks Canyon where you lose your radio and your cell signal, both for the better part of 40 minutes at a stretch. Dell knows every mile marker on that road the way you know your own driveway. Same joke about the burnt coffee at the Jenkins Marathon every single week, going on 8 years. You could set a clock by that man. That Monday, I set my clock by him same as always. Monday, 5:52 a.m., KY 80, mile marker 4, outbound from the London yard. Dispatch, Unit 114, go ahead. Coy. Mornin'. Rollin' with the full 46. Y'all shorted me 2 pallets of paper goods. I ain't turning around for it. Dispatch. Copy, I'll note it on the manifest. Coffee any good this morning? Coy. Burnt, same as always. I'll check in at the Gap, nothing there. That's just Dell. Monday, 9:14 a.m., US 23, mile marker 132, approaching Pound Gap. Coy. Unit 114 coming up on the Gap. Dispatch. Copy, 114. Coy. Hey, I picked up a rider back here, just so it's on your books. Didn't want you thinking I got 2 heartbeats in the cab and nobody told you. Dispatch. Say again, you got a rider? Coy. Yeah, girl thumbing it up by the overlook. Ain't said 2 words. I'll drop her at Norton. I want to be straight about how I took that at the time because it matters later. We had a policy against unauthorized riders, still do, but I'd worked this road long enough to know what you see on it. The mines shutting down, The pill trouble that never really left this part of the country. Kids and grown women both standing on the shoulder of 23 with a bag and their thumb out because the bus don't run out that far anymore. I told Dell to get her out at the next stop and reminded him it was against policy. And he said, 10-4, like he always says 10-4. And that was that. I logged it as a verbal warning. I did not think about it again for 3 hours. Monday, 12:40 p.m., US 23, mile marker 148, Virginia side of the gap. Dispatch. 114, you make that drop? Coy. Not yet, she's all right, don't say much. Dispatch. Dell, who is she? Coy. I didn't get her name. Here's the thing that should have stopped me cold and didn't. Not yet. I pulled Dell's file that afternoon out of plain curiosity, mostly to see if I needed to write him up formal. 15 years with the company, 8 years on that exact run. Not one single incident of an unauthorized passenger. Not one. This is a man who wouldn't let his own grandson ride along to the yard without calling me first to check if it violated the policy. A guy that careful doesn't pick up a stranger on a mountain road and just forget to ask her name 3 hours later. Monday, 4:30 p.m., Gate City, Virginia yard. Coy. Made the drop, headed to the hotel. Dispatch. They get the count right? Coy. Yep. Dispatch. What about your rider? Coy. She got out here short. No joke about the coffee, no complaint about the dock workers, which is a subject Dell can usually go on about for a good 2 minutes. I remember thinking he sounded tired and leaving it at that. I closed the incident out in my head. I was wrong to. That evening around 8, the office line rang and it was Charlene, Dell's wife. Did you call him yet? She asked, before I even got my name out. I told her he'd made his drop fine, checked in on schedule, nothing wrong that I could see. Did he sound right to you? I said he sounded tired. She was quiet a second, then said something about it being that week, and asked would I call her the second I heard from him again, not wait for her to call me. I said sure. Figured it for some kind of anniversary thing, none of my business. I didn't think hard about it. I should have. Tuesday, 6:03 a.m., US 58 near Norton, Virginia, return leg. Coy. 114, rolling. Dispatch. Copy. Sleep all right? Coy. Not really. She's back. Dispatch. Who's back, Dell? Coy. The rider. Same one. Got in right at the gap again, same spot. That's the point I actually felt something turn over in my stomach. Because Dell wasn't describing a coincidence, he was describing a routine. Same spot. I asked him what she looked like, mostly to keep him talking, and he told me, flat, like he was reading off a bill of lading. Young, dark coat, always got it buttoned up even though it's July and near 90 degrees out. Doesn't talk. Sits with her hands folded in her lap like she's in church. I've worked that stretch of road by radio for going on 2 decades, and that description didn't scare me by itself. There's a clinic up that way, a shelter down in Norton, and truckers being truckers. Everybody's got a story about somebody they picked up or somebody they saw standing at that overlook who wasn't quite right. Fog sits in that gap thick enough some mornings you'll lose a coal truck in it 30 feet ahead of you. I told myself the mountain plays tricks on tired men. I told Dell to be careful and keep me posted, and hung up believing my own explanation for about 4 more hours. Tuesday, 11:20 a.m., off-schedule call, dispatch to Mickey Salyer, Unit 108. Mickey was running the same loop about 90 minutes behind Dell that day. I called him direct, off the log, just to ask if he'd laid eyes on Dell. Dispatch. You see 114 out there today? Salyer. Yeah, seen him stopped on the shoulder up past the gap, hazards on. Pulled up alongside to check was he broke down. Dispatch. And? Salyer. He was in there talking, arms going like he was having a whole argument with somebody. I figured he had a rider, so I let off and swung around to get a look at the passenger side before I pulled back on. Dispatch. And? Salyer. Wasn't nobody in there, man. He was by himself, just sitting there talking to the empty seat. I sat with that a while before I called Dell back. When I did, I asked him straight, was he alone in that cab? He said no, she was sitting right there, and asked why I'd want to know a thing like that. Tuesday, 3:47 p.m., London Yard, inbound. Coy. Back. Dispatch. That's it? Everything go all right? Coy. Yeah, one-word answers, from a man who 2 days before couldn't get off the radio without telling me about his coffee. I called Charlene that evening like I'd promised, told her what Mickey saw. I expected her to be surprised. She wasn't. She was quiet a long time. Then she told me about Josie. Josie was their daughter. 19 years old, 6 years back, driving home from a diner shift in Whitesburg in the rain. Went off the road at the horseshoe curve on the Virginia side of the gap. The same stretch, same 20-yard patch of shoulder Dell had been idling on when Mickey pulled up next to him. Charlene said Dell doesn't talk about her, not ever. Not on her birthday, not at Christmas, not once in 6 years that she can recall him saying that girl's name out loud. But he gets strange this time of year, every year, right around the date. Quiet. Sleeps bad. Last year she'd caught him getting dressed at 2 in the morning, saying he was going to go check on something out on 23, and she'd had to physically stand between him and the truck keys to keep him home. This year, she said, felt worse than last year, and that's why she'd been asking me the same question every time she called. Had I called him yet? She wasn't asking as a courtesy. She was asking because she was scared. I told her I'd flag his unit for extra check-ins. I meant it as a comfort. I don't think it helped either one of us sleep that night. Wednesday. Dell was off. Charlene called once, said he'd stayed in bed most of the day. Quiet but himself. Ate dinner, watched TV. Nothing alarming. I let myself relax some. I shouldn't have, but I did. Thursday morning he was back on schedule. I'd flagged his unit and told the morning gate guard, an older fellow named Sherman who takes the security photo of every truck on the way out, to keep an eye out. Thursday, 5:58 a.m., KY 80, mile marker 4, outbound from the London yard. Coy, Unit 114, rolling. Dispatch, copy, 114, how you feeling this morning? Coy, fine. Dispatch, sleep good? Coy, fine. Thursday, 9:05 a.m., US 23, mile marker 132, approaching the gap. Coy, coming up on it. Dispatch, copy that, 114, you good? Coy, yeah. I want to be honest, that call didn't worry me the way it should have, because yeah and fine is still Dell answering, still Dell on schedule, still Dell at the mile marker he's supposed to be at the time he's supposed to be there. It's what came after that broke the pattern I could still make sense of. Our trucks run electronic logging devices, GPS tied, automatic, no way around it. Around 9:40 I pulled up Dell's unit on the board out of habit, just checking his progress against his call-in, and the numbers didn't match. He'd radioed at 9:05 that he was coming up on the gap, mile marker 132. The log had him stopped, engine idling, 0 speed, at mile marker 151, 19 miles further down the Virginia side than he should have been able to reach by then. Parked there, unmoving, since 8:58. 7 minutes before he ever radioed me. He'd called in a location he wasn't at anymore, like his voice was still back at the gap while his truck had already gone on ahead of him. Mile marker 151 is the horseshoe curve. It's where Josie went off the road. I tried him 6 times on the radio starting at 10:54. Nothing. I had Curtis standing next to my desk and Charlene already on hold on the other line, because I'd called her the second the numbers didn't add up. At 11:12 he came back. Dispatch, 114, you copy? Coy. Yeah, I copy. Dispatch. Dell, where are you right now? Coy. She wants me to take her home now. I told her I would. Dispatch. Who? Dell? Who wants you to take her home? Coy. Josie. I've replayed those 11 seconds of silence before he said her name more times than I can count. The whole room went still, Curtis included, and Charlene, still on hold, started crying before I'd even told her what he said, like she already knew from the shape of my voice what was coming. We called Virginia State Police out of the Wise office right then. I stayed on that radio the whole time trying to keep him talking, and mostly what I got back was silence. And once, close to noon, one sentence I wrote down word for word because my hands needed something to do. She said she's real tired of riding. A trooper named Adkins found the truck 40 minutes later, pulled off at the overlook above the horseshoe curve, hazards on, engine running, driver's door standing open. Dell was outside the cab near the guardrail, just standing, looking down into the gorge. Adkins said Dell didn't seem surprised to see him. Dell said, "She got out here. She said she's home now." Then he let the trooper walk him back to the cruiser without a fight. He was checked out at the hospital in Norton that afternoon. Physically, he was fine. Dehydrated, exhausted. Charlene told us later he'd quietly stopped taking a sleep prescription he'd been on since the year Josie died, ran out of it the week before, and never said a word to her, which the doctor said could account for a man going 3 or 4 nights without real sleep and starting to see things that aren't there sitting next to him in a truck cab. That's the explanation I clung to for about 2 days. It's a good explanation. It fits. Then Sherman came and found me at the end of my shift that Thursday, before any of us knew yet that Dell had been found safe, while we were all still sick with waiting. Sherman runs the morning gate, takes the automatic photo every outbound truck gets when it crosses the scale. He'd gone back and pulled Thursday's, 5:58, Unit 114, the one taken the same minute Dell radioed in sounding fine, sounding like himself, hours before the gap, hours before anybody's account of a rider getting in anywhere. Sherman didn't say much when he showed it to me, just turned his laptop around. It's not a good photo. Never is. Cheap security camera, dawn light, glare off the windshield. But in the passenger seat, past Dell's shoulder, there's a shape. Pale. Turned toward the window like it's looking out at something. Sherman said his first thought was that Dell had hung his high-vis vest over the headrest like some drivers do, and I wanted that to be true so bad I made him pull up 2 other mornings that week to compare, hunting for the vest in both of them so I could tell myself that's all it ever was. It wasn't in either one, and there's a plain fact underneath all of it that no amount of wanting will move. Sherman's gate is the only way in or out of that yard, and his log shows Dell rolled through it alone, same as every morning for 8 years, with nobody walking up beside that truck before it ever left our lot. Dell's back at work now. Off the mountain routes, Charlene asked for that, and the company gave it to him without a fight, moved him onto a local delivery route that never takes him past London city limits. He's in counseling. Charlene says he talks about Josie now, some, which he never did before, and she says that's worth more to her than she can put into words, whatever else came with it. She still calls the office sometimes, not every week anymore, but every so often the phone rings and it's her voice, and the first thing out of her mouth is still the same question it always was. Did you call him yet? I always have. He always answers now. A few weeks after, a driver named Cutter Ratliff, who doesn't know one thing about any of this, radioed in off the southeast loop, matter of fact, asking if it was normal to see a girl standing up at the Gap overlook in a heavy coat in 90-degree heat, thumb out, not moving much. Another driver came back over the channel before I could answer, somebody who's run that road longer than I've been dispatching, and said, easy as anything, like it was just a fact about the road, same as the switchbacks or the fog. Happens up there sometimes. Don't stop for her. I didn't say anything on the radio. I wrote it in the log, same as I've written everything else here, with the time and the mile marker, because that's the job, and because I still don't know what else to do with it, except set it down and let somebody else decide what it means.